Okay, good morning, everyone. Let's get started with the safety announcements, and that'll kick us off. Thank you.
Your safety is of foremost importance to the MTA. Therefore, we ask that you listen to the following instructions. In the event of an emergency, notify emergency personnel in the room and 911 should be called. If an alarm sounds, wait for a public address announcement and follow instructions. If told to go to another floor or to evacuate the building, leave all unessential items behind and use stairwell A just across the main hallway or stairwell D down the hallway past the elevators. An automated external defibrillator, AED, for use by trained personnel is in the main hallway just past the elevators. Thank you and have a safe day.
Okay, thank you. We're going to start with public speakers, but before we even get to that, I want to acknowledge that unfortunately, this is Commissioner Vanderpool's last Transit Committee meeting. We will miss you. Thrilled for you and for new opportunities, but very sad that you're leaving us. And personally, you have been gracious and helpful and thoughtful and a wonderful colleague, and you're a source of huge amount of wisdom and experience, and we're grateful for you. And I'm sure that we will do a larger send-off on Wednesday, but I didn't want to even jump in before acknowledging how wonderful you've been on this committee. So thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go to public speakers. Do we have any public speakers?
Good morning, Madam Chair. We have 23 public speakers registered today. I'd like to remind our public speakers that in the interest of fairness and time to all speakers, we limit everyone to 2 minutes. Please be aware of the clock in the front of the room and the warning light you will see reminding you that you have 30 seconds left to conclude your remarks. The first speaker will be Sue Dodell, followed by Valerie Joseph, followed by Kathleen Collins.
Good morning. My name is Sue Ellen Dodell. I'm an attorney who lives in Riverdale in the Bronx. I'm here today to tell you that I'm very disappointed in the Bronx bus redesign plan. I travel from Riverdale to my job in Melrose by public transportation, and under your new plan, it would take me 82 minutes to take buses to go about 10 miles, which is totally unacceptable. A few months ago, I attended one of your community meetings, which was meant to get feedback from the public, and your representative said that the plan was meant to improve bus transportation. But as far as I can see, it is a plan to save the MTA money by cutting much needed bus service. It is ironic that at the same time as congestion pricing for cars is being implemented in New York City, bus service will be curtailed. In addition to commuting to work, I also take express buses to Manhattan, the BXM1, BXM2, and BXM3. And I oppose your plan to discontinue southbound service from Riverdale on weekdays after mid-afternoon and to reduce service on weekends, which you say is because the buses have few people on them. I have taken those buses, and I have found them to have substantial numbers of people on them. If they are not full, it may be because people have waited for express buses that never came and have given up. I have had that experience many times, and I've had to take the local bus and subway, although I have some mobility issues and should take buses only. In short, I oppose your bus redesign plan and urge you to revise it to continue express bus service as it currently exists and to improve local bus service. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker will be Valerie Joseph, followed by Kathleen Collins.
Good morning, board members. My name is Valerie Joseph, an advocate for Accessoride for the Brooklyn Center for the Independence of the Disabled. We understand that there will be an extensive rework of the on-demand pilot program with a limit of only 16 rides a month, with each ride restricted to $15. $15 from my home to a meeting to the MTA would be as far as the Bell Parkway. I will be back on regular MTA van service very soon. New York City Transit has proposed this change, even though on-demand rides in yellow or green cabs cost less than the blue and white buses. And in fact, this program costs only about $16 million this year. We've asked for a modest expansion and test of how the program would work with another 1,200 riders would be selected scientifically. That wouldn't break the bank. But instead, New York City Transit is claiming an on-demand program for everyone would cost too much. But that's not what we're asking for. We urge you to question the reasoning behind this change. Ask yourselves, how will it help AAR riders? If you answer that question, you will know it's time to push Access-a-Ride to come up with a better plan. And also, Veronica, we will miss you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Kathleen. The next speaker is Kathleen Collins, followed by Murray Bowden.
Sorry to keep you waiting. I noticed that we all heard this morning an announcement about your safety is of foremost importance to the MTA. Well, I'm very happy to hear that because I've been using Access-a-Ride and I've been using, it's called the brokerage service, and it's these black cars and also taxis that they send me. And I think it's great because they call me up when they're going to be delayed. They call me up when they get to my location, so I don't have to wait out in the cold or in the super heat, which really does affect me. And that's great. But about 98% of the time when I'm in those vehicles, they don't have seat belts or shoulder belts. I ask them, and they look at me like I have 3 heads or 4 heads. But, and even today, I asked the gentleman that took me this morning, I said, can I have a seat belt? And there was no answer, and there was no seat belt, and there was no shoulder belt. And recently, I was in one of their vehicles, and he stopped short, and my head, I hit my head on my forehead here and my cheekbone here. I didn't call it in because I was like, well, you know, it didn't really show a mark. It just hurt for a couple of minutes. But that's not, this whole thing, this is terrible. And if you want to raise the seatbelt defense in any of your cases, I'm going to be out there telling the plaintiff's bar that there are no seatbelts, and that is not a valid defense. Because right now, you don't have that defense when it comes to these vehicles. And I want to put that on the record here today, that you do not have that defense in any car accident case regarding those broker services and your taxis. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Murray Bowden, followed by Tucker Salavera.
I live in Hartsdale, New York, and we're concerned, Hartsdale is concerned about safety. They've given me these new wristbands so that pedestrians can be seen. They're free, and it's the kind of forward thinking that your team is showing here. There are so many things that are going forward, and I'm afraid not everybody knows about them. There are things that aren't going as fast as they should be. There are a lot of problems to solve at the same time. But I've watched the videos of your team. I've watched people downstairs. I've watched people all over your team. The young guys are doing a fabulous job. And yes, things are not going as quickly, and they're not covering everything. Can't cover everything at once. You're going forward in a very good way. I've stood here for many years and say, why don't you do this and why don't you do that? You're doing them one at a time. You're doing them as fast as possible. And I want you to know I've recognized it. And I want to thank you and your team for moving forward so quickly. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Tucker Salavera, followed by Michael Ring.
Good morning, and Cooper has changed my life. It's especially for being here on time. But I want to bring some particular attention. I understand that the pilot program is very popular within the disabled community, and we are thankful that it's available inside. However, it is a more proactive field to drive for rail avoid picking a job or may us. It is the equal answer the ATA promised us, and it stands to both customers and driver makes you clear of the program. We can't afford the costs or even roads our obligations. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Michael Ring, followed by Jean Ryan.
Hi, I'm one of the lucky 1,200 people that are in the on-demand program for Accessoride. Before I was in this, I had to take Accessoride vans, and basically it doesn't really pay to try to do that, to do anything, but to get to a doctor's appointment, because you have to plan an extra hour and a half of travel, because being a half hour late for the van is still considered on time, and if you want to go to Staten Island from Brooklyn, going to Manhattan first is considered reasonable. So you can't get anything done. But now that I'm in the on-demand program, I could volunteer regularly, I could have a job, I can get things done. But this new proposal that we're hearing, I mean, we heard about it a month ago, but we haven't really know what's going to happen after New Year's, of capping it at 16 rides a month and $15 is just sabotaging the program. It's going to become useless. I live in Brooklyn. I volunteer in Manhattan. $15 doesn't get me to Manhattan. It won't work. There are other ways to make it continue to work, to expand it. I mean, you gave it to 1,200 people who really wanted it. You gave it to the 1,200 people who are going to use it the most. So yeah, it's going to cost a lot of money to us 1,200 people. So if you're going to expand it to 1,200 random people, maybe they won't use it so much. Maybe expand it to a lot more people and find out how random people really use it, and it won't cost so much. But it works. I mean, people need to, I mean, you all don't know 24 hours in advance when you want to come and go. And these Accessoride vans take you on a shared system works. Uber makes it work. But Accessoride treats you like a UPS package. You know, they move you all over the place. Every trip takes an extra hour. We're not healthy people. Sitting in a van for an extra hour isn't really a good idea. Thank you.
Thank you. Jean Ryan will be followed by Chris Greif.
Hi, I'm Jean Ryan. I'm from Disabled in Action. I think cutting e-hail and putting a cap on it is a really bad idea. We all have emergencies. We all have things that pop up where we absolutely have to get there. And I think I've probably testified before about family members being sick and, being unable to get to the hospital to see them or help take over their care or something. And, $15 for people who live in the outer boroughs, it's discriminatory because we can't get anywhere for $15. And most people can't afford the rest of the trip. So I think it's a really bad idea to do that. And you're going to put us back on Access-Ride, blue and whites, or brokers where the cost is going to be high. So that, you're going to save money by spending it? That doesn't make any sense to me. The other thing is that the seatbelts and shoulder straps, I'm on broker now, and I never had a problem, well, 1 or 2 times in 20 years or more of riding on Access-Ride on the blue and white vans, but on the broker service, forget it. With taxis and brokers, there's no such thing as a waist strap or a shoulder strap. And today, this was me in my vehicle where the strap was right across my jaw, and I couldn't move, and you couldn't move the strap. It was just me and the strap across my jaw. If we would have had to stop short, I would either have been beheaded or I would have had a broken jaw. You have to train the drivers, and you have to insist that they have the proper equipment. It's dangerous. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Chris Greif, who will be followed by Deborah Greif, who will be followed by Jason Pinheiro.
Gesundheit. And good morning. I'm Christopher D. Greif. Yeah, I'm a member of the New York City Transit Riders Council, a accessibility member and Long Island Railroad, but also advisory council and DD council members for every disability. But I'm here today because there are a couple of things. One, I agree with everyone we're talking about Access-Ride. We just need to be very careful with safety with Access-Ride. Safety is very important. But we also got to remember the safety of subways and buses as well. We are moving on, but as I remember, we also got to keep advocating for our elected officials to tell them that we need money for accessibility for elevators, buses, and making sure that we keep that up. We have seen ridership going up, and I implore all our MTA employees who have been helping people with disabilities and seniors working together. That's the thing I've been saying all along. Work together. Let's get our service running properly and running properly. And I will say this, if we keep it running properly, and please NYPD, this is something I have to say also, we do need to help the homeless, whatever we can do. They are out there in this cold weather. We got to help them. We got to work with Department of Health and Mental Hygiene once and for all to please get them somewhere, not sleeping on the floors of the station, not sleeping on a train, because it's not easy for the MTA employees, because we can't just take them off because they don't know if they might have a weapon or something. And I heard that from the MTA union very much, but at the same time, safety is the strongest word. And I know I know I'm going to be running out of time, but I also want to make it clear that this is the holiday season. We need to think, what can we do in the 2020 future? Andy Byford does an excellent job for the last 2 years, but again, it's not just one person. We all need to advocate to proper transportation and continue to fast forward. Thank you, everyone. Happy holidays.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Deborah Greif, who will be followed by Jason Pinheiro, followed by Lisa Daglian.
Good afternoon. My name is Deborah Greif. Yes, I am his mother. But I'm also the chairperson of the Brooklyn Family Support Advisory Council, the state rep to Albany from Brooklyn. I'm also on the Long Island Railroad Accessibility Committee. I'm also bring up a quick point. I'm the daughter of a person who had disabilities, and she was born 1932, so there was maybe 1 or 2 elevators. There were ramps at Stillwell Avenue and also at 42nd Street, but the grade wasn't correct. But one thing, I was taught how to advocate and how to figure out which part of the system was accessible. Now, I understand I would love to have every station ramped, elevators. I would love all that. But what I also have been happy about since the change when Mr. Andy Byford came in is this. I am now treated like a human being much better by the bus drivers. Now when I say to the driver, I cannot get my walker off your bus, they pull up or put the ramp out. I've been treated so much better. It's like, it's a pleasure. And they, instead of insulting me or saying to me, oh, you don't need the walker. And they even did that when my son needed it. I don't hear it anymore. And that's a pleasure because, you see, I do want true accessibility. But but I'm seeing that now the full MTA employees, their unions, understand that there are different forms of accessibilities. We can't just only, and don't think I don't want it, but we have people who have vision, we have hearing, and they have other disabilities, developmental abilities. They can't always understand. So honestly, what you did at J Street but in Brooklyn needs to be repeated because that is much easier. Now the parents have told me their children who have cognitive issues now know how to get up and down and around that station without getting lost. Now, I hope that's done for the rest because we need all types of accessibility done. Thank you.
Thank you. Jason Pinheiro will be followed by Lisa Daglian, followed by Iris Kelly.
Good morning, Andy and Sarah, and happy holidays. First of all, I want to mention why we're seeing an increase of the 12-9s in our right-of-way. 12-9s, when I hear that term, I get scared, to be honest, because I don't want to be in a situation that someone cynical either pushes me from the back and I ended up under the train, transported to the hospital, and so many things could happen. And another thing is surfers. We have been seeing a spike in surfers, especially people that are half of my age. And another thing I want to bring is the vending machines at Jamaica Center. Sarah, you can take note about that. They're not working. I have received reports even this morning that they're not working. And if Andy could take note about this, if there's an incident, let's say on the Lexington Avenue line, we don't have collaboration from Metro North. If they could cross honor between GCT and the nearby stations in the Bronx. And 2 weeks ago, I was at 96th Street on the Broadway 7th Avenue. I didn't see car cleaners whatsoever at that temporary terminal for the 2. So we want car cleaners. We don't want dirty cars. And people should be mindful of taking their own litter with them, not leaving them in the subway car. And Veronica, I'm going to miss you. I know that I'm following your footsteps, and I'll be visiting you in Delaware someday. So that's all for this month, folks.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Lisa Daglian, followed by Iris Kelly.
Sounds like a road trip to me. Good morning. My name is Lisa Daglian. I'm the Executive Director of the Permanent Citizens Advisory Committee to the MTA, or PCAC. Thank you, Veronica. I echo what everybody has said, and everything you've done for the city's riders and the region's riders really been terrific, and we'll miss your voice, but look forward to the innovations that you bring to Delaware. November was the 6th consecutive month with weekday on-time performance above 80%, and the 15th consecutive month in which subway delays reduction targets were met. The new peak running time metric is also trending in the right direction. Clearly, things are going well, and we salute Andy and the entire Subways team for your leadership. Subway ridership and revenue are also going up. Continued and consistent service improvements are key to continuing this trend. Cutting service, as we continue to state, would be the exact wrong thing to do now. See, the biggest improvements are on the 7 line, which brings us to our concerns about CBTC issues that were raised, and we know that you're equally concerned about that. We haven't seen the effect of the delays and problems reflected in the statistics yet from the snow and slush, but it would be a shame to see such good OTP trajectory take a hit because of a problem that should never have happened in the first place. We hope that, and we know that you will be holding Tal's feet to the fire. We still have a lot of winter to go. We're also concerned about the delivery of the R179s. And this shows on a larger perspective the downside of debarment, which we'll be talking a lot more about on Wednesday. Bombardier would have been debarred already, work on the new train cars would have ceased, and PTC would have been halted. So they must be held accountable, but there has to be a better way to do it. And despite the fact that bus ridership and revenue are not seeing the same gains as subways, bus riders are starting to see good news. We're thrilled about the 14th Street busway and hope to see that replicated. And Flushing would be an interesting place to do it. So happy holidays to all of you from all of the riders, and thank you so much for all you do for us.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Iris Kelly, followed by Daniel Ross, followed by Luth Lowenkron.
Hey, my name is Iris Kelly, and regarding now is the R trains. Going from 95th Street into the city is fine, but coming home from Atlantic Terminal is like waiting 15 minutes in between. The app shows you planes N's and D's in between, but then there's like, one far apart each of the R train going home. And also, there's more accessibility of elevators. So I know it's not working on them now in Brooklyn, but not fast enough. There should be a lot more for other people to get through. And then for the seatbelts, I agree with you on that. The vans, put the seatbelt on, but once it jolts light movement, the seatbelt loosens up. It never stays tight, not like you do in the regular buses. Also, I'd like to know more about this thing with on demand, because I think it's a good idea that they have, and I understand what they're saying about a cap on it. I wouldn't want it either. It should be more just regular like you do everything else in the buses. The regular $275, that's it, you pay it and nothing to worry about, because it helps us get where we have to be, somewhere maybe important, less minute finding out from our family, doctors, or anything that's going on. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Daniel Ross, followed by Ruth Lowenkron.
Good morning. My name is Daniel Ross. I'm a senior staff attorney at Mobilization for Justice, which is a member of ARG, the Accessoride Reform Group. We agree with the MTA's plan to double the Accessoride on-demand pilot to 2,400 people by adding a representative sample of riders based on age, usage, and geographic distribution. But we reject the caps on rides and trip distances that have been proposed, as an uncapped pilot for 2,400 people will give the MTA important data to project future costs for further expansion, while it also plans cost-saving measures to create space in the budget for that expansion. When Accessoride was being developed in the late 1980s, dispatch schedules had to be designed daily by hand in advance. There wasn't another way to do it. But we don't live in that world anymore. If paratransit service were being designed today from scratch, it would be designed to work on demand. It's logical, it's fair, and it's cost efficient. In 1980, MTA Executive Director John Simpson called subway accessibility requirements a cruel hoax and refused to comply. In 1983, MTA Chairman Richard Ravitch said accessibility would just cost too much. The next year, Mayor Ed Koch killed an elevator plan, saying it would be cheaper to give limousines to all New Yorkers with disabilities. We didn't get the elevators, and we didn't get the limousines. And for the next 35 years, accessibility has always been too expensive. Now you've concluded that traditional Accessoride is costing too much, and you've announced restrictions to the MTA's most successful program, the on-demand pilot, that will cap costs at less than $7 million, half of what it cost in 2019. We understand the MTA is in a budget crisis. You always are. But you can't always fix that budget crisis on the backs of people with disabilities. We thank Andy Byford and Veronica for your leadership in prioritizing an accessible transit system. And we note, as they both surely realize, that an accessible system will dramatically reduce the cost of Accessoride in the long run. In the meantime, the MTA must expand the pilot without caps, implement other cost-saving measures, and end the cruel hoax for people with disabilities. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Ruth Lowenkron, followed by Iman Ramawi.
Good morning, Ruth Lowenkron, the director of the Disability Justice Program, New York Lawyers for the Public Interest, also a member of ARG, the Accessibility, the Accessoride Reform Group. So, question for you, talking about what you intend to do with the on-demand program. What do you think if someone came to you and said, at best, you have the possibility of arriving at your job on time 8 times a month? That is ridiculous. But that's what's going to happen with the pilot program. You're offering a cap, you're mandating a cap of 16 rides. I'm really good at math. You take one there and one back, so now we're down to 8 rides a month where you have that possibility of getting there on time, let alone all the other things that my colleagues have talked about. A ride that is there when you need it, gets you where you want to go. And don't forget, people with disabilities want to do other things than go to work. So you're only going to get to work on time 8 times. What else? What is going to happen with the rest of your life? This really is not fair, guys. And I'm going to pick up where my colleague left off, Dan Ross, who was talking about, is this phase 2 of the pilot even going to make any sense? Math I'm good at, science not so good at. But I do know one thing. There's this thing called the scientific method. And when you change experiments, you can only change with one variable. And if you change by too many variables, like all of a sudden adding people, and more importantly, all of a sudden reducing the number of rides and reducing the amount of money you can have, what kind of an experiment is that? It's one that is doomed for failure. And my last comment picks up on a comment by Veronica Vanderpool from last time, who I say a very hearty thank you to while I'm saying it, and I'm finishing my last sentence to say she questioned whether we should be thinking about changing the pilot or asking for more money from the city when you have not looked at cost inefficiencies. We say the same thing. There are cost inefficiencies. We will work with you. I've said before, we'll go out there and
conclude your remarks.
Yep, and look for money with you. So please recognize a bad option with the pilot, and we need that money, which we will help you get. That's what we need to do. Thank you very much.
Our next speaker is Iman Ramawi, followed by Tareya Mitchell.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Iman Ramawi. I'm from New York Lawyers for the Public Interest. Expand the number of riders who can participate in the on-demand pilot. Eventually, all Access-a-Ride users should have access to on-demand, but to allow the MTA to plan for the expansion, the program needs a representative sample of the Access-a-Ride community to achieve a proportional mix of high, medium, and low-frequency riders of different ages, and geographic distributions across the boroughs. Do not impose artificial limits on the numbers of trips or the lengths of those trips. Some riders will need many short trips, some riders will need few long trips, others will take a variety of short and long trips, or maybe take one long trip a month, or none another month. Adding caps before accurately measuring need is just another constraint on people with disabilities whom the MTA has excluded from buses and subways. Work with the drivers and the vendors to ensure that on-demand service is available throughout the city. For on-demand service to be truly successful, it needs to be available across each borough, which means having a sufficient vehicles and drivers who are able to complete the trips. Also, I've had about 10 cars recently in the brokers that didn't have working seatbelts, and I bumped my head a number of times and didn't bother reporting it because my complaints are ignored. Every time I bring up a complaint, the driver is never at fault. I'm always at fault, and I'm not going to complain anymore. But once on-demand changes around, we're going to ramp up these complaints just so you guys know that traditional Access-a-Ride is not working for us. Finally, I'd like to thank Veronica for everything you did for us and being a strong advocate, and we're going to miss you. And our hope is that the mayor appoints someone with disabilities on the MTA board, because there never has been one, and there needs to be one. And if I have to be the one, I will, but I don't think y'all can handle me. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Tareya Mitchell, who will be followed by Charlene Jean.
Good morning. My name is Tareya Mitchell. I'm with the People's Power Assembly. So I have a quick thing, and I'm just going to read it. So only 23% of the subway stations are accessible. So that's 117 out of 472 subway stops. And we demand elevators now because equity and accessibility is a civil right. And instead of expanding the accessibility, the MTA is rolling it back, and people with disabilities, Black, brown, and poor folks, and the homeless are paying the price. So we are here to say accessibility to public transit is a right. And regardless of our race, age, religion, across the cis LGBTQIA gender nonconforming spectrum, that's a mouthful. Non-binary people with disabilities deserve privacy, autonomy, and dignity in our everyday lives. And we don't get that from this inaccessible transit system, and we don't get that with, this accessoride. The MTA is not doing us any favors. You are lawfully bound to follow the ADA, and you've been able to skirt the issue, but now the payment is coming due. So you have to make the subways compliant and accessible for disabled riders. And you can't do this because you pay debt service to banks about every 82 seconds. That's about $7 million a day. People can check that math. And these monies can go to fund ramps, elevators, auditory, sensory, and visual aids for persons with disabilities, failing in faulty infrastructure, such as old signals, tracks, and trains, and taking seats out of the subways is not accessible. Not having 2,700 transit workers inhibits accessibility and safety to riders across the spectrum. So you're going to lay off 2,700 workers and hire 500 more cops.
Please conclude your remarks.
So the MTA should not be paying debt service off the backs of disabled New Yorkers, black, brown, poor, in the intersection of these communities. So we're demanding more seats, more accessible seats, and no police on subways, platforms, and buses. We demand 100% accessibility at all stations in the New York City transit system.
Please summarize your comments.
Expanded accessoride, more bus lines, and increased bus service. We demand an expansion of e-hail, no $15 cap, and it should be available to all accessoride customers. Full access, full service, no cops, and no fares.
Our next speaker is Charlene Jean, who will be followed by Tilly Wolf.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Charlene Jean. I am a scholar of authoritarianism and a volunteer with People's Power Assembly. In light of the importance of safety and accessibility, and as someone with eyes and a heart, I'm horrified by the growing police presence by the MTA subway system. It is said this presence, the implementation of 500 additional cops, is to avoid fare evasion, a cost of $200 million. However, the already controversial plan will cost taxpayers $249 million. And what will this cost provide? Undercover cop presences accessible only for arrest, largely with poor black people. This money could go to elevators and expanding accessoride. Accessibility has always been too expensive, but money is always found for expanding a police state. Further, there is a costly advertising campaign rallying public opinion against making the subways accessible for all, and that includes economic accessibility. We have not normalized swiping each other forward for folks who cannot. Reduced fare programs take weeks to process and are requested by mail in the age of the internet. The machines still break, buses still never come, and folks have to walk. And New Yorkers are expected to not question higher fares and higher arrest, particularly for poor, black, disabled people. This is clearly the MTA's effort to transition New York into a police state constantly under surveillance and at high risk for harm, violence, and arrest.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Tilly Wolf, who will be followed by Colin Ashley.
Hello, I'm also a volunteer with People's Power Assemblies, and it is unacceptable that the MTA is employing hundreds more police officers to enact a new version of stop and frisk, which disproportionately targets black and brown folks. Not having 275 is not a crime. These funds should be directed toward elevators and full accessibility at all stations. When I broke my foot, I looked into Accessoride and found I was ineligible. Getting around was extremely painful, difficult, and very expensive. People's accessibility needs can change in an instant and still need to access public transit. Injured folks, people with strollers, people with heavy loads, people with permanent mobility impairments, and so many more need elevators to access the subway. The subway should be free and accessible to all. Arresting more New Yorkers will not fix the MTA. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Colin Ashley, who will be followed by Vincent Tassetta.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Colin Ashley, and I'm a sociology professor at Hunter College and an activist and organizer with People's Power Assemblies. I think it's actually utterly baffling that the MTA is still considering Governor Cuomo's racist plan of adding 500 more cops to the subway. The amount of cops already added to the subway have only continued to prove that the NYPD's practices and policies disproportionately target Black and brown youth. There have been videos heavily circulated on social media, such as the one showing a dozen cops pointing their guns on a 19-year-old for simple suspected fare evasion. This is only one of the many examples that we see happening because of the already amount of cops added to the subway. The stations being targeted by this policing campaign are in working class Black and brown neighborhoods. 89% of those arrested for fare evasion are Black and or Latinx. A Black police officer is actually suing the NYPD because he was told by a superior to only target Black and Latinx communities and individuals and to leave white and Asian individuals alone. The MTA's fare evasion campaign is another form of broken windows policing and a continuation of racist policing practices like stop and frisk. The city of New York was sued for stop and frisk. The MTA is setting itself up for its own discrimination lawsuit, and it is naively ignoring the historic moment we're in, where Black and brown communities are rising up against these racist attacks against us. Money for elevators, money for access, not for cops. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Vincent Tassetta, who will be followed by Sawyer Eason.
Hello, everybody. My name is Vincent. I am a social work graduate student. I am also going to talk about how the MTA is wasting our money by putting it into the police force rather than giving us accessible transportation or just transportation that works at all. Everyone has seen the ads that they are putting on us for the very expensive ad campaign saying that we're going to arrest you for not paying $275. We're going to put you in jail for not having $275, less than a cup of coffee. This is the normalization of a police state. They want all of our shitty commute, all of our commute that's taking hours and hours for everybody in a crumbling system, in a crumbling transportation system. They want us to blame each other so that with this invention of fare beaters, right, these are the fare beaters, these are the people that are taking all of our money and getting rich off of it. They don't even ride the subway. Never. So they want us to police each other. They want us to say, oh, someone's hopping the fare because they keep raising the fare, which people cannot afford. They keep raising the fare. The service isn't getting any better. And then people have to hop the turnstile. And so the fare beaters, these are the reason that the subway is bad. This is the reason the subway is crumbling. This is why our commutes are giving us so much stress, right? But in reality, it's because they want us to blame each other. Because if we're blaming each other, we're not blaming them. And they're the ones that are in control of how much money we have access to, how much money goes into the transportation system. And so they don't have any money to expand Access-a-Ride on Demand, to expand Access-a-Ride, to build elevators, escalators, to make the system more accessible, right? They don't got any money for that. But they have millions and millions of dollars to pay $7 million to Wall Street every single day. $7 million. They have enough millions of dollars to add 500 extra cops. They're cutting labor costs by firing 2,700 workers, right, to make people lose their jobs, lose their access to resources. They have money, so they're gaining money from that, right? They're cutting labor costs, and then they have more money for the cops and more money for this ad campaign. But they don't have money for elevators. They don't have money for escalators. They don't have money to make it accessible, right? So every time you're on the subway, if you're able to access the subway and you see that very aggressive ad
Please conclude your
campaign
remarks.
that is in almost every single car, right? I want you all to remember that is them having us blame each other. Because when we're blaming each other, we're too distracted and not
Please
blaming
summarize
the
your
people who's in
comments.
charge of it. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Sawyer Eason, followed by Kevin Zhang, followed by Helene Schwarzenberger.
Hello, everybody. I'm Sawyer, and I'm with the Brooklyn Transcorp. The MTA's expensive fare evasion ad campaign, coupled with an army of police in the subway, has created a culture of fear and intimidation. People are being arrested in the subway for fare evasion with excessive shows of force and violence. When police officers pull guns on passengers for jumping the turnstile, they're saying that people's lives aren't worth $2.75. Poverty is not a crime. Blaming the MTA's failing service on poor people is a joke when you're able to pay $14 million for a fare evasion ad campaign, as well as money to hire 500 more police officers to arrest black and brown New Yorkers. I have witnessed people jump the turnstile and be met by 3 or 4 police officers for fare evasion. This is clear intimidation. This is not cost effective. You're trying to scare people. Stop intimidating poor people.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Kevin Zhang, followed by Helena Schwarzenberger.
Hello, good morning to Sarah Feinberg and Andy Byford. I would like to consider to BX41 Select Bus Service extend to LaGuardia Airport because the M60 Select Bus Service are too crowded between LaGuardia Airport and 125th Street. People who live in the Bronx by taking a train to 125th Street and transfer to the M60 Select Bus Service to LaGuardia Airport, and it needs to redesign the Bronx bus network for the BX41 Select Bus Service. The BX41 Select Bus Service will be extended between 3rd Avenue, 149th Street Station, and LaGuardia Airport in both directions as part of the Bronx redesigned bus network. Thank you and have a nice day.
Thank you. Our final speaker will be Ms. Schwarzenberger.
Thank you for allowing me to speak. I am both a disabled consumer and I work for the Association for the Rights of Disabled Consumers. And as such, I am very grateful to have a paratransit service, even more grateful since I've heard testimony about the nightmares on the subways, which I haven't used for over 20 years. I recently came back to New York from California, where I'd been living for the past 7 years, largely because I was rendered ineligible for paratransit service on a regular basis the last time I was here. And I became ill and I ended up having to go back to get some surgery. And finally returned a few months ago to find a slightly improved paratransit service. I'm not in the on-demand program, though I partially wish that I would be, except if they do limit the access to that on-demand system. So the other things that I have problems with regarding the paratransit service is that, number one, many of the drivers employed by the different car services don't speak English, and it's very hard to deal with them. Some of them are angry when you don't understand them, and some of them don't know how to find the addresses. And I've had to stand out in the snow recently for over half an hour because somebody parked the car on the other side of the street down the block and was texting me. Now, I'm visually impaired. I can't read text, so obviously I would have preferred they call me, and they were late on top of it. Some of the drivers are very courteous and kind and helpful, and an equal amount are extremely rude and nasty. Many of the vehicles, especially the large paratransit vans, are so uncomfortable. I happen to have a spinal problem, and having to sit in those vans is excruciating. So also complaining to number 8 on the phone is worthless because nobody listens. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you. Madam Chair, that concludes the public comments.
Thank you, and thank you to our speakers. I'd like to ask for a motion to approve the minutes from the November Transit Committee meeting. Is there a
Madam
motion?
Chair?
Oh, I'm sorry. Commissioner Albrecht, go ahead.
I know we're in a very political season, but on page 9 of the minutes, I think it should say prevent collisions, not prevent collusions.
This is always the highlight of the meetings when you point out the typos. Thank you. I agree. I missed it myself, but thank you. Any other changes to the minutes? Okay, I'd like to ask for a motion to approve the minutes from the November Transit Committee meeting. Second, all in favor? Thank you. Are there any changes to the work plan?
There are no changes to the work plan, Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Byford, your report?
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, as the chair said, thank you very much to the speakers. It's always insightful to hear what people say. One thing we will definitely follow up on is this issue of seatbelts. That was not something that I was aware of. We will take that up straight away after this meeting. I think my remarks, Chair, largely stand for themselves. I mean, at the end of the year, it's always nice to just reflect back upon what the team has achieved as an executive, but also as 50,000 men and women of transit. And I think we have achieved a lot. It's been a very busy agenda. There's been a huge number of initiatives that we've been required to undertake in addition to the daily challenge of running bus, subway, and paratrans service. And I'm very proud of the fact that pretty much we've risen to those challenges, and I commend the team for that. You'll notice in the book today, a lot of the imagery is around people, which was always the fourth element of Fast Forward, process improvement, and delivering a customer-led philosophy empowered by or fueled by well-developed, well-cherished, well-motivated people. So, and it's to the men and women of New York City Transit that I want to dedicate the fact that subway performance is improving. Sally and I were just at a event just now where we talked about the fact that we've had 6 periods in a row of 80% plus subway performance. I'll let Sally talk to that. The fact that we are seeing ridership turning around, the fact that we're seeing customer service improve, the fact that we're now seeing a real renaissance under Craig's leadership on the buses, where we are finally tackling some of the things that have long dogged the bus system, and under Alex's leadership, the fact that we are making real progress on accessibility, notwithstanding the issues that we heard about today. And I was particularly pleased to hear one of the deputants today make reference to the fact that they're noticing improved customer service on behalf of the broker providers, but also on behalf of our bus drivers, and do a big shout out to Jennifer, Sarah, Mira, Annika, and Yvette in our accessibility unit, because that's not by chance. We have been undertaking dedicated customer service training for our bus operators, and a big thank you to them for the fact that they've risen to that challenge. So I think I'll leave it there, Chair. It's to the people of men and women of transit. I say a huge thank you for all the great work over the last 12 months. The fact that we are now seeing sustained performance improvement is down to the frontline staff and down to my managers and admin teams who have worked so hard throughout the year. The one final thing I'd like to say, and obviously we'll say proper goodbye on Wednesday, is on a personal note, a friend to someone whom I respect very much, and that's you, Veronica, a personal friend of mine, someone who has led the charge on accessibility and helped us put together Fast Forward, which in turn or the accessibility element thereof, which in turn informed the capital plan. We'll miss you on this board. You're fair, you ask insightful questions, you hold us to account, you hold our feet to the fire, but you also acknowledge positively the success that we're making, and we'll miss you immensely. And I'm going to be on that road trip to Delaware to come and see you in Duane.
Thank you. Ms. Lobrera for the Subways report.
Good morning. In 2019, we sustained a historic turnaround of subway performance. We reversed a years-long decline in service reliability, on-time performance of our trains, and we moved from a low point in 2008 of 58% on-time performance on weekdays to now 6 consecutive months above 80% on-time performance for weekdays. Even better, we're seeing these improvements across every single line in the system. Delays are down by more than 40% when we look at November data this year versus last. Major incidents are down by close to 50% comparing the 2 years. MDBF is up 9% this November versus last, and customer journey time metrics are also showing significant improvements year over year. In addition to this, we see that our run times are continuing to improve. So again, on the screens, you can see the percent improvement of run times for each line in the system in the peak periods in November of this year versus last year. Now remember, this is unlike most of our service delivery statistics that compare our performance to our schedule, which is an important thing to measure. This statistic is a pure measure of travel time. So it measures how fast trains move in 2018 and how fast trains move in 2019. And what you can see is that in 2019, every single line in the system is moving faster than it was in 2018 in the peak period. The only line that is not on here is our N, and that is because the N line has a different service pattern this year than it had last year, so it's not an apples to apples comparison. And this chart also doesn't include the shuttles. Contributing to this improvement in running times is the ongoing work that we have to recalibrate slow clearing signals in the system and also to safely raise speed limits where we can do so. We've raised speed limits at over 200 locations in the system, and we've recalibrated over 350 timed signals in the system. Another very encouraging data point, and Andy mentioned it, is the increasing ridership we see in the subways. In October of this year, of 2019, we had 6 weekdays where we crossed the 6 million rider threshold. We haven't seen 6 days at 6 million riders since December of 2016. So that is a big accomplishment, and it shows riders are also noticing these improvements in performance and are coming back and riding the system more. The improvements that we're realizing are a culmination of a tremendous amount of hard work through the Subway Action Plan, maintenance and repair campaigns, through the optimal operations focus of the Save Seconds campaign. I'm hugely thankful to the entire Subways team who's working each and every day to deliver safe, reliable, and improved service. I want to wish all of them a happy holiday season, as well as thank all of our customers for a year of patience as we've worked to improve service. I'd like to wish all of our customers a happy holiday season as well, a happy new year, and we look forward to delivering more improvements in the new year.
Sorry, Commissioner Lacewell.
Thank you, Sarah. Thanks, Sally. 2 questions. One is, are there any outlier lines? And if so, are we focusing, do we have like a triage kind of plan? That's point 1. Point 2 is, I think it would be good if these are sustained improvements to find a way to directly communicate that to the ridership, maybe even in the stations or something like that. I'm sure there are ways of doing it, but you know, we do these meetings, and of course there's the press and news stories, but the ridership is like right there, and if there's a way we can communicate directly so at least they can see the arrows are going in the right direction, I think that would be helpful.
That's a great idea. Commissioner Albert?
So congratulations.
I forgot to let Sally answer.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Can we have you more coffee? Like, is this not enough? Sorry.
So on the first question about whether there are certain lines that are more challenged than others, the short answer is yes. So there are unique challenges in the system. Some are more complicated than others. What we see in terms of the improvement is, of course, showing the greatest improvement between 2019 and 18 on the 7 line because we've introduced CBTC over that period of time. But we know that we have other types of challenges that are specific to corridors. For example, the 4th Avenue corridor in Brooklyn is challenged because that's where all of our work train moves are happening for the high levels of work that are happening in the system. A lot of our trains are moving out of the 38th Street yard, which affects travel on those lines. So we've been very focused on our schedules to make sure that they're accurate. We've been very focused on our service delivery tactics there to make sure that we are interlining as best we can with the slower moving work trains when we need to put them into service. And we've also really focused on that corridor in terms of speed improvements. We've been able to make a number of speed adjustments on that corridor so that we're seeing run times improved consistently month over month along that corridor. So that's just one example of a specific focus, but we have that type of specific unique focus on lines throughout the system.
Chair, if I might just add to Sally's answer on the second point, Commissioner, because I think you make a really valid point. We do have now all these screens that you see up around the subway stations, and also on some of our rolling stock, we do have defined screens or dedicated screens that we can put stuff on. So I'll ask Sarah to maybe, let's just have a discussion about what we can put up. We do advertise, for example, keep customers informed about what Fast Forward is delivering and what the success has been to date. Having said that, I think there is we don't want to give the impression that the job is done, but equally, I think you raise a valid point. We'll take a look at it. Thank you.
Thanks, Sally. Commissioner Albert?
Congratulations to everybody at Transit for these wonderful numbers. People continue to come up to me and say, you know, my ride's better and things of that nature. I do have a question about one of the statistics. On additional platform time, there's a 71% increase for the Franklin Shuttle. Was that one particular incident, or what's the reason for that?
I think it was one particular incident that happened in the peak. What we see with the additional platform time and the additional train time statistics is they are very sensitive to fluctuations. And so when we see significant changes, it's typically because of a small number of very impactful incidents. What we're more concerned about with those indicators is whether we see a sort of steady worsening trend. Those are the types of things that we would really want to pay closer attention to. Although that's a new statistic, and we're still figuring out how it fluctuates with the seasons. We think, and we've been looking at this more closely recently, we think we're going to see seasonal fluctuation with the additional platform time and the additional train time because they're also very sensitive to ridership changes.
Okay, thanks.
So what would be an example of that, like of a major incident, like a door
It could be a downed limb during a storm.
Okay.
The Franklin Shuttle often is subject to those types of incidents. I think there was also a signal failure in the AM peak on the Franklin Shuttle in the month of November that likely affected that, or maybe it was the month of October.
Okay. Sally. Okay, great. Let's go to Craig Cipriano for the bus and paratransit report.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I'm very fortunate and really excited to be leading buses under Andy at this important turning point in the city's bus system. Experience now clearly shows that more than ever, well-enforced bus priority improves bus speeds and bus service, and customers are coming back to the bus system. We see it on Staten Island, where bus speeds on the express network have improved overall by 10%, and we have some pockets, such as right out here at the UL Cary Tunnel, of bus speeds increasing by 40%. And consequently, we see that on the SIM network, we have higher customer ridership on the weekdays, Saturday, and Sunday. We also see it on 14th Street, and we're showing some data here up on the screen. Travel times are down since last year on average of 5 minutes, and by as much as 11 minutes in the eastbound direction at midday. Speeds have even doubled in certain segments since last year and are up by 54% on average. As a result, customers have come back, with ridership increases over last year of more than 30% on average on a Saturday and a Sunday, and 24% on the weekdays. And what's really exciting is that these ridership increases are also seen in the peak periods when the customers have a chance to choose other modes. We are beginning to enforce our right-of-way with the deployment of the Automated Bus Lane Enforcement Camera System, otherwise known as ABLE. On November 21st, new ABLE camera systems were mounted on the M14. We now have ABLE on over 100 buses across 3 routes. In addition, on December 6th, we announced the end of the 60-day warning period for bus lane blockers on the M15, and motorists are now caught by the new bus-mounted cameras will be issued a graduating fine violation structure starting at $15 up to $250 for any violation in a 12-month period. Consequently, we are also seeing some initial improvements on the M15 in terms of speeds and travel time, and we're really excited about that. To date, we have approximately 39,000 bus blockers on both the M15 and the B44, and we are making good progress working with our vendor to achieve the level of granularity that Chair Feinberg, I know you're looking for, and we'll continue to update you on that. We need that data to better understand where the bus blockers are, location, time of day, and most importantly, the type of fleet, so we could then go back and engage those fleet operators. We plan to rapidly expand the ABLE program to more bus routes next year, and the proposed 2020-2024 capital plan has $85 million dedicated for this program. We're excited about that. And I want to give a big shout out to Sarah Meyer and the whole strategy and customer experience team. We have also launched a new bus lane enforcement awareness campaign, which Sarah will talk more about during her report. Every day, buses replaces approximately 800,000 car trips. So by riding a bus, you do something good for the environment. This past Sunday, we took a huge leap forward, officially beginning our journey to our all-electric bus fleet by 2040, another key part of our Fast Forward plan. Yesterday, Andy and I were out there riding the inaugural trip on the M14 of the MTA-owned all-electric bus. Here's a picture in front of you today. By our estimations, each bus will save roughly 90 tons of carbon emissions per year and about 8,000 gallons of diesel fuel. We purchased 15 of these buses and we'll have 6 of them in service by the end of the year, with the remaining 15 by March of 2020. Under our current capital plan, we will purchase another 75 all-electric standard buses, which will be put in service across all 5 boroughs in all areas of the city. And finally, the proposed 2024 capital plan includes $1.1 billion to purchase 500 all-electric buses. We're really excited about that. In addition, we continue to make great strides on network redesign. This month, as Judy will explain, we are submitting a request to hold a public hearing on our proposal to redesign the Bronx bus network. At the same time, we have been working hard putting together our Queens draft plan with a redrawn bus network that we believe will help address many of the challenges that exist today. We'll share that draft plan and the proposed bus network online this month and at upcoming open house events. This is a real moment for the bus system. Buses are moving faster, more reliably, and are on an aggressive path to zero emissions. I'm excited about the momentum, and I hope our customers will be too. So my message to New Yorkers, as you see on the side of the bus, ride a bus and save the planet. Moving on to paratransit.
Why don't we stop there and then
Sure.
we'll go back to, thank you.
Absolutely.
I love your enthusiasm. I'm just going to start with a couple questions. Appreciate your focus on gathering the data from our vendors.
Yes.
We're clearly making a ton of progress and in capturing the photo and issuing the summons, but it's critically important that we understand, how the license plate matches with the driver, right? So is it a passenger vehicle? Is it a state-owned vehicle, city-owned vehicle, delivery vehicle, whatever? Yeah. And so I know you're working with the vendors to get that to us quickly, and I know that in some cases we have cameras that are pointed towards the curb where we need them pointed more straight ahead because we're in a bus lane as opposed to, or we're in a busway as opposed to a bus lane. So I know you all are working on that. I'd be happy to be included in those meetings because I want the vendors to understand that we're not like on a slow TikTok here. We want to get that information quickly so we can address it. And then last month we had a conversation about some private companies' tendency to view tickets like bus lane violations and other parking tickets as a cost of doing business. They then bundle those tickets together and then basically go cut a deal where they pay 50 or 60% or whatever. But my understanding is, Craig, that you've confirmed with the city that that the bus lane violation tickets are not a part of that program.
That's correct.
Okay, that's great news. So that's helpful. Yeah. Okay, and then I don't think we've reached a conclusion on the 5-minute standard yet, but I know it's under discussion, so maybe we'll make progress on that and can have a conversation about that a month from now. Okay?
Yes, Chair.
Okay. Commissioner Jones.
Yeah, I guess I was going to ask the same question about the bundling problem, but given the fact that we're dealing with very large companies, is the fine structure going to have any impact whatsoever on them? Obviously, if we're talking about UPS, Amazon, these are enormous corporations. It's not the driver's fault. They're being told what they have to do. But is a $15, even $1,000 going to bother a large corporation, or again just wrapped into the cost of doing business?
It's a great question. Craig, do you want to address it and then I'll go?
Sure. So I think part of our challenge has been in the past, and this is something that I appreciate, Chair Feinberg, how you've been pushing, the team to get better data, granular data, is because I think part of the challenge is it's always been sort of observations, right, out on the road where we might recognize FedEx, UPS, and, unless we have the actual quantitative data, which we're starting to gather from the system now, it would be hard to us to engage these large-scale fleet operators. And another partner of us, or I should say, another large-scale operator that we need to engage is something like an entity such as United States Postal Service, for instance. But I think as we get closer, and again, I apologize that I know you've been asking over the last couple of months. We don't just have it yet. We're getting closer, but once we get this data, I think then we want to go out and directly engage those large-scale operators, to recognizing that they have their own challenges, but we need to work together with the city, because again, the whole purpose of those bus lanes is to move our buses, right? So we need to see how we could coexist with these other modes, recognizing that our main purpose is to get these buses moved along.
To Commissioner Jones's point, we are not in charge of the fee structure, right, on the ticketing.
Right.
And so, but we can certainly make our case that we think tickets, particularly for those entities, should be hiked once we have the data, if we see that's a problem. I'm also happy to publicly embarrass those companies if that works, or to work with others, because I agree with you, David. If it's just ticketing, that's the cost of doing business in the city.
It might be useful to actually bring the leadership of those companies in once this data is collected and have them present to this board. We've done it obviously with some of our vendors, but try to really force the issue and come up with something that can be workable here. But I don't think they have no incentive yet, but I think we might be able to do something more strenuous going forward.
I agree. And Commissioner Schwartz, will speak for him while he's out today, has made the point that if you tow those vehicles and impound them, that does have an impact, because of course they've missed their deliveries that entire day and can't get the car till the next day, which I think makes sense. Any other questions on buses for Craig before we move to paratransit? Okay, Craig, let's go to paratransit.
Thank you, Chair. I have a short paratransit report because I'll be handing it off to Alex, who'll be doing a broader presentation. But this year we made big strides in expanding the types of trips offered and leveraging the use of taxi and for-hire vehicles. Last year we completed 7.1 million trips and projecting 8.1 million trips this year, an increase of 14%. In fact, this month we reached a peak of 33,700 trips scheduled on one single day, the largest ever recorded since the inception of the program. This morning, as I mentioned, Alex will be reporting a larger report on our strategic plan for paratransit. But before I hand it over to him, I'd just like to take a moment to thank you, Madam Chair, to thank this committee, Andy, for all the support, and for our 18,000 hardworking men and women of buses. We've really made some great strides this year, and we're looking forward to building upon them in the coming year. So thank you very much, and happy holidays to everyone.
Thank you. Alex?
Sure. So I've been asked to, as came up last month, deliver kind of our strategic vision on what we're doing with Access-a-Ride. Our vision is very heavily geared toward finding efficiencies, which is cost efficiency, something that's often discussed, but also improving customer service at the same time. And that's no easy task because those tend to go hand in hand, but I think we're doing a pretty good job, and I'll get into some of the details of where we're going right now. So following up on what Craig was saying, it's hard to talk about Access-a-Ride service right now without talking about growth. As you see on this slide point, pretty much every category of Access-a-Ride has grown very significantly over the last 2 years. On the customer, the number of registrants, the number of active registrants, the number of trips, and similarly for the budget. And when you see that 14% growth year over year over the last 2 years, that actually totals to about 25-30%. So we've gone from about 6 million trips a year to about 8 million trips. Very, very, very significant growth. So when you see some of the cost savings that I'm going to be talking about in a minute, it's important to note that a lot of those cost savings are being used to offset this growth. So we staying within the envelope of the budget of Access-a-Ride, so we can do so, just to counter the growth, let alone all the new things that are being discussed, like on demand and everything else. So we have done as much as we possibly can just to be able to deal with this growth, and the growth, you know, I guess people like the service, or they need the service, more importantly. Next slide. So this slide just importantly shows you one of, I'd say one of the biggest things that we're doing to find cost efficiency, and also is improving service for the customers. This is shifting from our dedicated primary carriers over to our broker service. So if you look back at 2016 and times before that, 75% of our trips were done on our blue and white dedicated vans. In 2018, which was kind of a transition year between advanced reservation e-hail, you see that number trending downwards, only 50% of trips on primary carrier. Now, we're at year to date on 2019, we're about 43% on primary carrier. That means 57% of our trips are done in some way, shape, or form by a taxi or a car service or a broker. So that shows a very, very significant shift. And these are some numbers that you've heard before, but our primary trips are in the $85 range. So it is certainly a costly, more costly service. And that's one of the reasons we're trying to move off of it. Trips on broker are in the $30, $34 range. And taxi trips via authorization are very similar. So next slide, please. So this kind of shows you our trajectory as we continue to head in the direction of more trips being done by brokers or car services. To use rough numbers, we're about 60-40. We do believe that there is some more room in terms of shifting. It is getting more challenging to shift trips from our dedicated carriers to our broker service, and I'll explain why in a minute. But the two primary reasons are accessibility needs and how we address that, and the second is capacity on our broker. And capacity on the broker side means two things. It means, one, having enough vehicles to perform the trips, and two, having a sophisticated enough fleet and driving corps that understands what accessible service is to meet customers' accessibility needs. So as you see on this chart, we believe that there is potentially another 10 or 15 more percentage of trips that could be moved off of primary. And this, at this juncture, it gets pretty labor intensive, I will say, and individualized in terms of figuring out whether we end up at 65%, 70% on broker, or 75% because of the unique needs of customers. And I'll show you that in a minute. If you can go to the next slide. So what this slide shows you is there is a very, very large and diverse amount of customers who have different kinds of needs, wheelchairs, customers who have Alzheimer's, customers who have cognitive disabilities, customers who have walkers, customers who have visual disabilities. You know, these categories of disabilities are probably, you know, I would say, quote unquote, the last frontier in terms of shifting trips to brokers. Because if I could show you, 20 slides, I could show you for each category. It's even in the vision disability category, those who are blind or low vision, half the folks have migrated to broker have been, taking trips on broker and being totally fine, and the other half remain on primary. It either didn't work for them, drivers didn't understand call out and assist, or some other reason. So even within the same disability categories, the way a customer is able to shift from one mode to the other remains something we continue to study. And that's what I mean. As our brokers get better and as our brokers, we continue driver training to get them better, maybe there will be a time where more shifts can trip. But this has to be a gradual process that we continue taking on. And we literally do it grouping by grouping. Certain customers, we try broker, we see how it works for them, we get their feedback. And some customers say, some customers clearly say, you know what, I want primary, it's working for me. And even the staunchest advocates in the disability community will tell you they know that we'll always need some form of dedicated primary fleet. There are some customers whose accessibility needs are just of that nature. I think a lot of customers saying that whether they're coming off of on-demand or whether they're a new paratransit customer or whatever category they fall in, that they're going back on the blue and white vans is becoming almost a misnomer, with 60-70% of our trips being done by brokers, which is taxi vehicles that have shown better on-time performance, that have showed more direct ride times and things like that. The service really is improving, and our dashboard metrics really show it. I won't go into that here. I'm here mainly talking about our improvements and efficiencies. So if we can go to the next slide. So the next slide really represents the three main things that we can do from an efficiency standpoint. So right-sizing the primary carrier fleet, incredibly important. And it's playing out in two ways. It's playing out in the way of us shifting trips to broker, and also right now we're in the middle of a new RFP for our dedicated carriers. So as we continue to study and analyze how many trips we'll need to do in the primary fleet, that will dictate how many primary carriers we have in the future. And that represents a significant portion of the overall accessorized cost. And you'll see on the next slide, I'm not going there yet, hold on one second. On the next slide, we've traditionally had about 13 to 15 dedicated carriers. We've started reducing that number already, but where we end up in the future will be the main determining factor of what the financial envelope of Access-a-Ride looks like. And I want to give a lot of credit to our procurement teams and others who are working very hard on this procurement. The future of the way that excess capacity, extra vehicles are kind of accounted for financially in Access-a-Ride is going to change. So traditionally we've had we spent a lot of money on facilities, vehicles, costs, all kinds of different fixed costs that are just needed to keep a fleet of 1,900 vehicles just operational, even if we're not using it. The future models of dedicated primary will be much more built into supply hour, much more built into only when the vehicle is used, and they've been leading the way on that very much so, and we look forward to seeing where that goes. The second thing is our broker capacity and what we can do on broker. So it's like I mentioned, it's about having enough brokers. Do we have enough broker vehicles to literally do, let's say one day we'd be doing 20,000 trips, 25,000 trips. And then the quality of the drivers to be able to handle the accessibility needs of our customers. And then three, there are other operational improvements that we're looking at by using the web and app booking. It reduces call center volume, which has its own efficiencies. So I'm just going to present some of the next slide, please. So on this slide, what you'll see a little bit is kind of where we've gotten to, and I'll talk about the cost savings numbers. So in June 2019, we had about 1,850 vehicles in our primary fleet. As of December 2019, we've reduced that number of vehicles by 400, specifically 400 sedans were cut out. We also, one primary carrier contract expired, and an additional 2 primary carriers were terminated. So this, just in this move alone, generated a savings of about $25 to $30 million by this reduction. When you talk about the next phase, which is what would happen if we moved another 10 to 15% of Access-a-Ride trips to broker off primary, we believe that would allow us, and we're still studying the exact numbers, again, to reduce the number of carriers we have from 10, maybe by several more numbers, and then also to generate a cost savings that we believe would generate an additional 20 to 30 million just by this modal shift. Based on, and then we continue to study, what our call center metrics look like, what other metrics look like in terms of performance to see where we can get more efficiencies. But ultimately, we've had some I just want to summarize the savings as a total. So it's about $20 to $30 million that we've achieved with the reductions now, potentially another $20 to $30 million. Based on our continual efforts to shift trips to broker. And then the MTA-wide initiatives to get contract reductions, which is a one-time savings but helped us achieve $10 to $15 million, and so on and so forth. So the program is really being streamlined as much as possible. I think the team has done just a fantastic job in trying to work through this. Most of this has been achieved in pretty much a year, which is pretty impressive since we shifted off advanced reservation e-hail. I'd love to say that these savings could be used for things like on-demand and everything else, but unfortunately, because of just the massive trip growth and the massive other growth that we're seeing, a lot of these savings are just being used to offset offset the growth. But this is kind of our vision in terms of what we're doing from a savings perspective. And then we continue to talk month after month about the things we're doing from the customer side. Modernized scheduling, which will help customers have more direct rides and more on-time performance, which we believe will also have a cost savings. Better driver training across the board to make sure drivers know what they're doing. New vehicles. We've put hundreds of new vehicles on the road in our primary fleet this year, and we will be doing continue to do that as they get updated with GPS technology, which again helps our customers know where their vehicles are and have better notifications on their process. So with that, I think I'll end and take some questions if there are any.
Thanks, Alex. I wanted to start with right-sizing our fleet. I just wonder if we can, I obviously don't want to impact service, but I actually wonder if we can go farther in right-sizing the fleet than we've talked about thus far, and taking the number of carriers down even further. So in other words, I want to make sure that we are right-sizing the fleet to make sure that we're providing the service we want to provide, as opposed to right-sizing the fleet so that, in case we have one or two spikes every now and then, we're addressing those, but we're generally have like a bunch of folks sitting around without, we have a bunch of drivers sitting around without being engaged in travel. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. So I'll take that as a question. I think that's 100% true in terms of what we're looking to achieve. And I think there's two main factors that kind of go to that. So we went from 1,850 to right now in the 1,400, 1,300 range. If we move an additional 10 to 15% of our trips, could that get us to the 1,000, 1,100 range? It does become tougher as you have less trips. But there is always some excess capacity built in. An enhanced broker and the broker service to us is such a capacity is still something new. But if we can find a way to really have our confidence that on the peak day, at the peak moment, whatever the most challenging day is, the 33,000 trip a day that Craig mentioned, if we know we can rely on our brokers to flip a switch and get us 5,000 vehicles and drivers ready to go, that will really give us a comfort level to, put our excess capacity on the broker side, not on the primary carrier side, because on the broker side, having capacity is kind of free. There's no charge, right? Those are taxi drivers that are doing trips otherwise. Having excess capacity on our primary side does come with a cost. We're very aware of that, so we're managing it gradually. Because again, always the underlying principle, we have a zero denial mandate, and we have to continue to meet that. But what you're saying is definitely on the money in terms of our ultimate goal. And we're looking at this as phases. Phase 1, phase 2 of moving trips, phase 3 of dealing with excess capacity, and we hope to continue to see that grow. Thank you.
Okay, great. Other questions for Alex? Commissioner Vanderpool.
Alex, thank you very much for spearheading the strategic plan that I had asked just a few weeks ago, and thanks, Craig, for your support of that too. So with regards to some of the cost savings that you've identified that have already been generated from many of the actions that the team have taken, is there another aggregate estimate or projection for how much more money could be saved with some of the recommendations and or thoughts around that you've included in your presentation?
Sure. I think, there's some variable here and a little bit of quote unquote mystery, just because depending on how the dedicated carrier RFP goes, that will really give us the most concrete identification of what the savings will be. But in terms of our efforts from shifting trips, as we've said, we've already achieved, I believe, $28 million just this year alone. an additional 10 to 15% of trips moving from primary carrier to broker service, we believe would get us anywhere from the $20 million to $30 million ranges. Operational kind of improvements, whether it's the call center, which is also right now in an RFP, and let's say customers start using the app and website more. We did have a peak day recently where customers booked 3,000 of their trips via app and website, which is great. There might be a couple more $1 million saved in that. The call center as a whole is about $35 million a year, so there's definitely, if there was a possibility to bring that more in line, we're talking about, if you add all those up, anywhere savings from 60 to 70 to $80 million, which, if you think about it, in a program that is growing monumental, growing at unforeseen paces that nobody has been prepared for, it's could be very significant. I mean, we're talking about 10-15% of the overall budget being slashed during a period of growth from an efficiency standpoint.
Madam Chair, I have a few questions. Thank you. So you've been very clear, Alex, about the need to increase broker capacity, and you've said that not only during this presentation a number of times, but previously in your discussions and updates on paratransit. I would assume as part of that strategy, the team is having ongoing conversations with ride-sharing organizations like VIA, for example. I've been following some of the news and understand that Virginia, for example, has just awarded a contract with them to look at paratransit services. So I think having these discussions and with entities such as those, winning more contracts for paratransit will help inform an appropriate model for further exploration at the MTA and see how something like that could be customized to help support that increased broker capacity.
Yes, absolutely. I don't want to say that we're talking to them. I mean, we have procurement processes and other kind of things, but they have reached out to us. They are doing their part in terms of showing what some of the benefits that they could bring. And a decision by the agency whether we can find additional capacity in our existing 2 brokers or whether we feel like we may need some more vendors is, something that senior management would need to decide on. But at the same time, they have made it very clear that they believe they can provide paratransit type service using their existing models. We also know, for companies like Uber and others, they're increasing their wave capacity very significantly, which is a very big deal for us, because if they don't have wave vehicles and they can't serve customers with wheelchairs, then it's really a non-starter. So by them doing that, it brings in a level of comfort to us to potentially work with TNCs or ride-sharing companies. So we'll see where that goes, but certainly there's 100,000 vehicles in New York City, give or take, that they're using. It would probably behoove us to get in on some of that capacity.
I just have one comment and then one more question for you, Alex, and then you're off the hook. So I do have a comment around the eHail on-demand pilot. So the more conversations I have and the more discussions I have, I've been thinking a little differently about this. So I've been very supportive of the next phase of on-demand eHail and have been supportive of moving toward a structure and a system and a framework that does help constrain some of the unsustainable growth that we've seen. But as I've listened to a lot of the advocates in the disability community talk about this, it makes me wonder if the pilot for phase 2 might be designed a little differently. For example, perhaps looking at the averages of the trip rides taken and the averages of the per ride cost of those trips. So that it's more reflective of the current usage of the existing pilot of $1,200 that we have, as opposed to the cap of $15 or the cap of 16 rides per month. So there, that's not a question to put any of you on the spot. It's just a thought about as the phase 2 is continuing to be rolled out, if some of these other considerations might be considered. I've even heard from the disability community looking at an unlimited for phase 2 to better gauge and assess some of the ridership numbers. Now, I'm not frankly quite sure how I feel about that, just in terms of moving toward a system that ultimately does have to be constrained. But I think there's a very fair point of looking at a more random pool in the phase 2, which is the substance behind that particular recommendation, as opposed to the very eager and high demand users of phase 1. So again, just a comment. And then my question for you, Alex, and I'll sign off. Thank you, Madam Chair, for the time, is has there ever been some thought and discussion, perhaps as part of the transformation process, for paratransit to be its own division and not incorporated under bus?
Do you mind if I pass it to you, President Byford?
Wow. You've obviously been nosing around my desk recently, having a look at the papers. I believe it should be a separate division. It is something, though, that I need to get approval from the Transformation Steering Committee. I believe that particularly as Craig incorporates MTA bus even more into New York City Transit, he'll have quite enough to be getting on with. And building on Mike's excellent work, I do believe that we should have parity between subway, buses, and paratransit as a fully fledged division in its own right. So that will be one of the key points of my recommendations of the new look New York City Transit to the Transformation Steering Committee, headed up by an SVP. Mm-hmm.
Any other questions for Alex?
May I just say something? And I apologize, I missed it in my script. You know, I wanted to say personally thank you to Veronica, because as the chair of the Paratransit Committee, you know, Mike, Alex, and myself have been working very closely with you over the last couple of years, and you're going to be a big loss for us, but, you know, we wish you all the best. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else for Alex? Okay, let's go to Sarah Meyer for the Strategy and Customer Experience Report.
Good morning. So as Craig mentioned, this month we're launching a marketing campaign to get private cars and trucks out of our bus lanes, raising awareness about the new ABLE enforcement program. Go to the slides. So these are some of the mock-ups that you'll see on the backs and sides of buses. Again, hopefully by the end of this week, they'll be out on the buses with the full fleet being completed right before Christmas. A special thanks to Ann Feldman, Greg Marshall-Yena, Annie Steimel, and Eugene Ribeiro for coming up with these. These were all done in-house, and I'm thrilled that they are going on the buses very soon. So those are some mock-ups. Okay, great. So in November, our engagement teams participated in 15 community meetings and 10 open houses that included ongoing conversations about the Bronx Bus redesign plan. Last week, we conducted our very first digital open house, broadcasted on our YouTube channel, and now it's archived on our website. So anybody that has questions about a specific route, they can go see that webcast and see the team presenting the information. It's available at www.mta.info/BronxBusRedesign. We also wanted to just give a quick update on our digital screen program. And thanks to Jano's and Alok's teams, by year end, there'll be 4,211 digital screens that are live at 140 stations. And now we have approximately 2,600 buses equipped with screens. That's 45% of our local bus fleet. The screens enable us to give real-time stop updates, service alerts, and transfer information. I also just wanted to give a quick reminder about our holiday service coming up. Subways and buses will be running on a special schedule on Christmas Day and New Year's Day. And we're again providing free service on our Q70 SBS service through January 1st to get customers to and from LaGuardia Airport. Also wanted to remind customers that our Nostalgia Train, our holiday Nostalgia Train, are currently running every Sunday until New Year's Day. They depart on 2nd Avenue on the F line in Lower Manhattan. I believe Andy went on the Nostalgia Train on Sunday and gave it great reviews. You can get more details at newyorktransitmuseum.org/holiday nostalgia rides. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Any questions for Sarah? Okay, thanks, Sarah. Mr. Deal with the safety report.
Hello, good morning, everybody. Just some highlights. Subway customer accident rates were slightly down when comparing the most 12-month period to the previous one. I do want to just make a small note that the last month they were actually down about 52 incidents, which is actually a 13% reduction. Bus collisions, collision injuries, and customer accidents have increased when comparing the most recent 12-month period to the previous one. It is worth noting that bus collisions and collision injuries have also both decreased month over month, showing the impact of the Department of Buses safety messaging campaigns at all depots. Employee lost time accidents show an increase on a 12-month basis, but are slightly down again month over month. The Office of System Safety continues to work with the operating departments to identify root causes for the most prevalent accident types and is currently developing a focused campaign to address them. New York City Transit has also met or exceeded most of our leading indicator goals and is on target to achieve one of the remaining goals by the end of the year. Lastly, the Department of Subways continues to make significant strides in the reduction of fires. And I would like to wish everybody, the board members, the employees, the customers, a happy, healthy, and safe holiday. Thank you. I'll take any questions.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Deal? Veronica?
Hi. I noticed that bus collisions and injuries have increased a little bit, but they have also, it's been noted that they've gone down month to month.
Yes.
Would you just address that briefly, please?
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with the Department of Buses, especially with the training that is now going on. All right, I think it's a forward plan that they have. Fall Forward is what it's called, and it really is making operators more aware of their surroundings. You know, now with us getting a lot more bus lanes and people coming from different directions, I think it is important for them to have that situational awareness. And I think that is, kudos to you, Craig, and your team, especially the bus safety people. They're really bringing that out to the operators, so this way they're aware of it.
And I want to shout out in particular the Vision Zero safety training. I've actually participated in it on 2 separate occasions, and I understand it's in its 4th cycle. I think that training is so instrumental. It is so pivotal. In fact, I've been talking about it at my new job as a model to replicate because I think it's excellent. So, and I wasn't sure if. Because I see that as having been so effective, and I've seen the data and the statistics over the 4 cycles of the training and how the impact that it's had. So I did want to shout that out and just better understand this slight increase. So thank you for that.
I live off of Queens Boulevard in Woodside, and let me tell you, it's good to see that accidents in that area have decreased. All right, because it was pretty bad at one point. Just to let you know.
Commissioner Albert.
Yes. Can you tell me the cause of the majority of the fires that are listed, the 900 and some odd fires?
Right. A lot of the fires that we are finding are, some of it is trash fires that do occur. That seems to be the main point.
Triggered by a spark from the train?
Well, not necessarily. A lot of times it can be on a station's platform.
Oh.
All right. That seems to be something that we're actually looking at.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? Okay, thanks, Mr. Deal. Chief Coogan?
Okay. Good afternoon. Year-to-date, major felonies in transit are down 3.7% with 86 fewer felony crimes for the year. For the month of November, total major felonies in transit were down 9% with 24 fewer crimes for the month, 244 versus 268. There were 17 additional robberies, 4 additional felony assaults, and 45 fewer grand larcenies during the month. During the month of November, 47% of the total major felonies occurred in Manhattan, 27% in Brooklyn, 16% in the Bronx, and 10% in Queens. I want to highlight an impactful arrest made recently by our Manhattan Transit team. Last Wednesday, during the heart of the evening rush hour, plainclothes officers began surveilling a suspicious individual at the 42nd Street station on the Lexington Avenue line. The individual's intentions became clear when he proceeded to sexually victimize a female rider aboard a northbound 5 train. Lieutenant Nick Devukai and Sergeant Michael Dennis of the District 4 Special Operations Team intervened and arrested 61-year-old Freddie Johnson. It's important to note that Mr. Johnson was recently paroled in November after serving 11 years of state time for sex-related offenses in the subway system. In fact, Sergeant Dennis was part of the team that apprehended Mr. Johnson in 2008 for a similar vile act that resulted in his prison sentence. Mr. Johnson, whose history of deviant criminal behavior in the subways dates back to the 1980s, was charged with persistent sex abuse, and is currently in custody. He has 55 prior arrests, approximately 50 in transit, with 36 of them being sex-related. He's also a level 3 sex offender, and he's on lifetime parole. Finally, as you know, we recently welcomed Commissioner Dermot Shea as our city's 44th police commissioner. On behalf of the commissioner and Chief Delatorre, I want to assure members of the board and our riding public that the safety and security of subways will continue to be among the highest priorities for this administration. With that, I want to wish everyone a safe and enjoyable holiday season, and I welcome any questions or suggestions that you may have. And I also like to join everybody else in thanking Commissioner Veronica Vanterpool. You've always been very supportive of the NYPD, and I wish you the best.
Okay, thanks so much, Chief. So I'm going to start with a couple questions. I know others have some as well. And I had given Chief Delatorre a heads up that I was going to ask some of these questions, so hopefully he passed them along. So first, you know, there's a lot of data that gets shared with this board publicly. Sometimes it matches up, sometimes it doesn't. So I just want to dig into it a little bit. So I've been trying to review the year-to-date crime data in 2019, and I read it as follows, but I want to just see if you agree with me. Misdemeanor assaults up 11.5% year-to-date. Does that seem right to you?
It's 11.4 if you want to be exact.
11.4.
That's close enough.
Robbery up 11.5%.
As of this morning, robberies are up 9.7%.
Okay, so maybe I'm looking at through October.
If you want to go,
and
if
you're
you want to
looking
go
at-
through November, they're up
Okay.
11.5.
Okay.
If you want to go,
Yeah, through November.
Okay.
Sex crimes up 2.7%.
Yes.
Okay, petty larceny up 4.2%.
Yes.
Felony assaults, no change year to date.
They're down now, but at the end of November, they were even.
Okay. Employee assaults, including physical assaults, verbal
Well,
assaults.
one thing I'd like to add, not to cut you off.
No, go ahead.
But if you want to go, one thing we should add, that crime is down 3.7% in this transit system. We're going with the crimes that are up, Overall crime is down 3.7%.
Right, that number is shared with the board, but the numbers that I just went over are not shared with the board, which is why I just wanted to highlight them and
Okay.
make sure that we're on
Well,
the same
robbery is
page
shared
here.
with the board. Sex crimes, I believe, is shared with the board. So
Well,
there are crimes that we do share with you. But go ahead.
Okay, so the last couple of months, we've had a debate, an ongoing debate about numbers and statistics. And when I look at what's shared with the board in terms of the monthly board book, these numbers were not in it, unless I'm missing something. Maybe I'm missing something. Okay, so I just wanted to make sure you agreed with it. And then it seems like there's a bunch of I think there's agreement across the board that assaults on MTA employees, physical assaults, verbal assaults, spitting are up. Seems like there's disagreement on percentages. Do you have a percentage that the NYPD goes with?
Again, what we do, we do assaults on transit workers in the subway system.
Right.
That's what the Transit Bureau does. And our assaults on transit workers for the subway system are 24 versus 30 for the year, down 6.
You're saying that assaults on MTA workers are down?
Yes. In your question, I saw your question, which you asked. Certain things are not assaults, which you bring up. Verbal assaults, there is no such thing as a verbal assault. Certain things could be harassments that we do not categorize as assaults.
Okay.
Assaults against MTA workers, another part of your question you ask, is that we treat them as misdemeanors. That's totally false. We do not. Assaults against MTA workers, according to the penal law, which was changed, is a felony. So what I'm giving you is the felony assaults. There are no misdemeanor assaults against MTA workers.
Okay, so you're saying that felony assaults on MTA workers
Are down
in
for
your
the year.
judgment are down for the year, right? So you don't have to read into my question. I'm not saying that when I ask how are we treating some of these incidents, I'm not alleging anything. I'm not saying you're treating them wrong. I'm just trying to get my head around how we're treating these incidents and what the numbers are.
We treat them seriously, like any victim of a crime, especially with the MTA workers. We work with them every day. We treat it very seriously. We investigate every case of an assault on an MTA worker. We also do it on any member of the public, every crime's investigated.
Great. So, so I wanted to turn to, and this is, I just don't know the answer to this, and would love to know what the policy is. So, there's what I would call lesser crimes, and that may be the wrong description of it, right? I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a law enforcement officer, so I may not even be describing it the right way. But what I'm talking about is groping, public urination, public lewdness. How are those issues treated by officers? So with the caveat that my guess is this is like a hard thing to catch, right? Because it's like quick, it happens, it gets reported, and you know, like the person has like left, you know, 2 minutes before, 5 minutes before, 10 minutes before, disappeared into the system. How does that, do those incidents get tracked? Do they end up as a statistic somewhere? Is it up to the individual officer? Can you just talk me through that a little bit?
Well, if we get a, you know, public lewdness, you know, forcible touching, groping, which you said, that gets in our sex crime figures. We treat that extremely serious. As you know, you yourself were a witness to a crime in the subway, or one of those, the sex crime act. You reported it. We pulled, you know, camera footage, and the other day we actually made an arrest on a 66-year-old male for that act. So we treat it very seriously. It's not a minor crime. Public urination, that's a violation that an officer has to observe. So we're not going to pull camera footage on somebody urinating in the subway. But a sex crime, to me, that's very serious. You know, and again, that one that I actually, you know, brought up to you, you know, we actually pulled camera footage. Our, you know, Transit Special Victim Squad followed up, put the stuff out to the media. The person turned himself in. This other person, which they were out there following this person around, who did 11 years, you know, in jail doing state time. Again, we followed him. We make many arrests, you know, for sex crime arrests. It is hard. You got to be out there. You know, you have to, you know, follow these people. And sometimes, you know, you have to follow them until they commit the crime.
Right.
You know, that's one thing why we keep on pushing for this exclusion program. For people like this that just got out of jail, even though hopefully he will be going back because he has such a terrible record. But we have to follow people around over and over.
Right.
You know, and we've been pushing this exclusion program for many years.
Yep.
Years before I was in the Transit Bureau.
Yep.
And I've been there over 6 years now.
No, I appreciate that. I've been supportive of it. Other questions for Chief Coogan? Commissioner Lacewell, you got a question?
And one other thing, just one thing to add, 45% of the sex crime arrests, and sex crimes do have arrests. So almost a half of the, you know, the incidents happen do have arrests. So.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you, Chair. Just to be clear, I don't think anyone doubts that law enforcement takes all criminal activity seriously. I think the question is, how are the statistics compiled? What goes into each category? What are the statistics that come to the board's attention through, obviously you're not going to do every single bit of information, but I think that it's perfectly normal for the board to want to understand the statistics that we're getting, how they're compiled. How do you treat certain criminal activity doesn't mean do you treat it seriously or not. It means how is it captured and where is it captured in the numbers, because we may decide that we want to see more information. So I think that that's the spirit in which it's intended. On recidivists on sexual offenses, if the person has previously been convicted of a crime in the subway system, in the transit system, and is in jail, does the MTA get any kind of notification when this person is coming out? Question one. Question two, when the person is sentenced, do we prevail upon whichever appropriate department it is, a probation department, city probation department, whatever other prisons-related systems there are, to try to include in sentencing some kind of A, notification to us, B, some kind of condition so that when they're coming back out, there are conditions regarding their movements through the transit system, obviously making sure the person can go to work and whatever else is necessary, but not allowing them to just come right back into the system and prey upon people all over again. What do we do in that regard to try to have conditions with respect to the release of people, understanding we're not in charge of it, but what do we do? What do we actually do?
Okay, it's a long question, but the first thing with people, crimes, when they're reported, we take a complaint report. So anybody reporting a crime, we take a complaint report, it's investigated. That's how we come up with our figures, the crime numbers. A certain amount of it is shared with the board. If the board calls and asks, we could share more. That's put in the book might be different because obviously not going to put a load of stuff in there, but we do put a certain amount of things in there. There's also the NYPD website. You can look up crimes there, which probably will have more crimes than that's, given for the monthly board meetings. On the the sex crimes, we worked with the MTA legal. So anytime there was a person legal this was maybe a year, 2 years ago, I'm not sure the exact time frame. They had a thing where we tracked people who were arrested going through the court process. The MTA legal actually wrote letters to the judge, trying to get a stiffer sentence and to treat so the judges would treat these crimes seriously. So that was one thing that we did along with the MTA board, and with the MTA legal.
This person
Yeah,
who's
one other
arrested
thing-
you,
one other thing-
one second, please, sir. This person you described in detail as having just been arrested, who had a long record.
Yes.
What safeguards did we have in place? What efforts did we make to keep that person from roaming the system and preying upon people? Is that one of the people who we communicated with the judge or with the appropriate probation department or whatever other city agency or other agency is responsible for controlling that person's activities post-conviction?
I mean, we have a parole program where people who are on parole, they get stipulated, a certain amount of people. I'm not sure if he was stipulated yet, but we go to the parole and ask them to be stipulated. And if we see them in the transit system, we can't arrest them. But we can notify parole. They can, take their parole away and put them back in. But we can't arrest them just based on them being in the system. And
All right, Chair, I'm asking if we could get a report on this individual in whatever circumstances make sense.
That makes sense. Dave Farber, do you?
and he was just released on November 16th, so it wasn't that long ago.
Okay.
When he was,
Does legal want to weigh in here and answer any questions, or?
Yes. I would point out that the proposed legislation specifically includes provisions that during the pendency of criminal proceedings in connection with bail or release, that conditions could be imposed by the court to prevent or limit access to the transit system, and that in connection with convictions, that courts similarly impose partial or temporary restrictions on access to the transit system.
So, David, with respect, proposed legislation is all well and good, but time goes by and things happen, right? So we could talk about this more offline, but I think that we need to be in communication with whatever agencies make recommendations to the court when someone is being sentenced or when somebody is being released, so that we can directly communicate the facts and circumstances. That's the job of probation, parole, these various agencies, is to do some kind of risk assessment. And it's not unusual, but we have to bring the facts to their attention and we have to make the request without waiting for legislation, in my opinion.
That's right. So I think one of the things Commissioner Laso is asking for, which makes a lot of sense to me, is let's take this one as an example. Let's look at exactly what we knew, what we know, what we knew, when we were informed, what we did, so that we can use it as a case study on how we, like, where we might have missed things. Not saying anyone, we're doing what we can. It's hard to keep up with folks who have committed these crimes 50, 60, 70, 80 times. but let's look at how this was treated as a case study so we can see where there are holes and what we can do while we're waiting on Albany to act. Does that make sense, David?
Yes, I would like to add one more thing.
Yeah.
So, Commissioner Lacewell, I know that you have brought this up in the last couple of meetings. I want to acknowledge that. We have had follow-up conversations. I have with Tom Quigley at headquarters and with others. So we are recognizing your comments, and I think your suggestion of further offline conversations is a good idea.
And just this person that we're speaking about, this predator, I mean, if this isn't the perfect example for an exclusion program to be included, and with that, again, we only look to put the worst of the worst in there. We're not looking to put people that do one crime, two crimes. I mean, somebody like this who's the worst of the worst, or just another crime, December 10th, a sleeping passenger is, has a person go in, obviously take his stuff. The person has 97 arrests. These are perfect examples where an exclusion program should be, put in place.
Right.
And again, we've been going over this for years,
Yeah.
and trying to.
No, look, I think this board is in agreement with you. Commissioner Lynn?
Thank you. If you look at page 103 of our book, which is your chart on crime statistics in November, it really helps express exactly the problem I think everyone is circling around. If you look at the total number of felonies, you see it's down from 2313 to 2227, from 18 to 19, or down 3.7%, 86 total. That makes a general sense that, look, major felonies are down. If you look to the top of your chart, you see what really frightens people, which is murders have gone from 1 to 3, and rapes have gone from 1 to 3, or murders and rapes have gone from 2 to 6. And if you look at robberies, you see that they have gone from 435 to 485, up 50. So the really frightening stuff to me on that chart are those top 3 rows. And to the extent that they have all gone up, and that there were 2 rapes and murders have gone to 6, that's the type of headline, newspaper headline, that scares people. When you think of why is New York now considered a safe city, an incredibly safe city, it's because murders have gone down from 2,000 to under 400. That's what everybody around the country talks about. It seems to me these very powerful statistics in those areas, which are only a small proportion of the overall reporting, but are the things that really frighten the death out of people, those are things that need to be focused on. And I would be very interested in knowing what is the murder, rape, and robbery approach that is being taken, because of what I do see is a dramatic increase in that area, and clearly that is the area that captures everyone's imagination.
Well,
Yep.
if I could just jump in for a moment. I mean, I think those numbers certainly get attention, but that's actually those are not the numbers or the data that I'm trying to focus on, because I don't think that we have a rash of murders in the system that I think people should focus on. What I'm focused on is, frankly, if you just follow the Twitter feed of the Transit Bureau, December 3rd, we're seeking suspects for several robberies. November 28th, grand larceny. November 26th, public lewdness. 23rd, attempted robbery. 22nd, homophobic knife and someone thrown onto a track bed. November 21st, assault. November 21st, stabbing. November 21st, sexual abuse. November 16th, assault. November 15th, robbery. November 14th, assault. November 8th, assault. November 6th, forcible touching. November 5th, grand larceny, in addition to 3 attempted rapes in the system. So yes, so I agree those numbers throw the balance off, but that's why I started with 11.5 increase, 11.5 increase, 2.7, 4.5. When statistics are used in ways where they don't show specific issues, then we can't see the whole picture. And that's why I went through a bunch of these, because some statistics are being shared in some places, some statistics are being shared other places, and not all of it is being shared in the place where everybody's working off of each month. So, so that's where I'm starting from. I'm sorry.
I don't even see where sexual assaults or groping, which category would they be included under? You can't really tell from looking at these pages.
Concern of using the Twitter feed. I mean, if you see 2,227 incidents a year, that means you expect 7 incidents a day. There are going to be a lot of incidents every day based on the size of the city and the size of the system. I do think we need focus, and I think we're saying similar things on this.
To be clear, so 2 points there. One, I only go to the Twitter feed because after repeated attempts to get a bunch of questions answered, no one was sharing data, no one was answering my questions, and so I started doing my own research, and one of the places I used as a source was the Twitter feed, and there were a bunch of other places too. And then, so that's my main point. Two is it is one of my pet peeves that there are folks in the city who say, well, it's a big city, it's a big system, some things are just gonna happen. It doesn't have to be like that. We're not gonna get to zero, but we can't be telling vulnerable populations, women, children, elderly, whatever, that it's a big city, so like shit's gonna happen, because we can do a better job of keeping people safe. And the fact that we live in a city with a lot of people doesn't mean it's any level of crime is okay. And to be clear, I'm not suggesting that, Commissioner Lynn, that you're suggesting that some of these are acceptable levels, but I think we have to get away from it's a big city, what are you gonna do? Commissioner Albert.
And one of the things with you brought up
Sorry,
Twitter
Chief.
and everything, with social media now, a lot of stuff is put out there where years ago it wouldn't be. We treat every one of these things seriously, whether it's a violation or a crime, and we thank people for putting it out there, thank people for taking pictures and putting it out there. But now we're able, I mean, a few years ago, 10 years ago, you wouldn't see stuff on the news. We have a picture of somebody that we're looking for certain things. Now we do, because people take pictures, they get the stuff to us, our detectives get these things out and they get it out to the media. The media is also willing to put this stuff out. So it helps us solve a lot of these crimes. So a lot of the crimes do get solved because of the help of the public, the MTA workers that are out there, and help us, getting this stuff, getting pictures of the people that are wanted for these crimes. Well, years ago you wouldn't have that. So you do see a lot more in the media and on Twitter, just because of social media. And like I said, and we welcome it. We're not against it at all, because it makes our job easier.
Right. Fair enough. Anything else for Chief Coogan? Okay, thanks so much. I'd like to go to Jay Patel for the financial and ridership reports. Jay?
Thank you. Year-to-date ridership for November 2019 was almost 2.1 billion, which was 1.6% above forecast. Average weekday ridership in November was 1.3% above November 2018. Average weekday ridership for the 12 months ending November 2019 was 0.1% lower than the 12 months trailing November 2018. November 2019 year-to-date fare box revenue was 4.2 billion, which was 1.5% or 63 million above the forecast. Non-reimbursable expenses for November 2019 year-to-date exceeded forecast by 63.8 million or 0.8%, mostly due to labor expenses, which were above the forecast by 80 million, including higher overtime costs by 50 million. On the MTA bus side, average weekday ridership for the 12 months ending November 2019 was 1.3% lower than November 2018. Fare box revenue was 2 million or 1.1% greater than the forecast, and the operating expenses were below budget by 15.3 or 2%, primarily due to the timing of non-labor expenses. That concludes my report.
Okay, any questions? Okay, thank you, Jay. I'd like to go to Alok for the capital program status report.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In November, New York City Transit awarded 8 projects totaling $122 million. This include the ADA accessibility and the circulation improvement project at 170th Street Station Jerome line. The purchase of 50 express bus, which will equipped with the latest safety and customer service technology. A communication project called Connection Oriented Ethernet. This is COE, which is essentially is providing the high reliability, transport speed, and the bandwidth. That is essentially is going to provide a resiliency service between the facilities like Livingston Street and RCC. And we also have awarded 4 small business mentoring program. Also in November, the transit completed 21 projects for $535 million, including the 6 station and Sea Beach line. That also has a 2 station, the elevator projects. The structural repair at 4th Avenue line, which is between the 36th Street and 56th Street. Also the acceptance of 20 B Division R179 cars. That concludes the CPM reports.
Chair, just one point on that, because I'm not sure if the committee would have necessarily picked up the subtlety of what Alok just said. I know we've had some issues with R179s, absolutely we have, but I am very pleased to say that the last R179 just left the shop where it was being constructed. So it's on the test track, and we're looking forward to delivery on the 30th of December. So it's been a long time coming, but these are good cars. They're increasing actually in reliability. The mean distance between failure just took a big hike. So we would now have got the full fleet of R179s on property, including the last one on the test track. Andrew, I knew you'd say something like that to me.
Well, because
is it 318?
Bombardier owes us 18 extra cars for the.
There you go.
Yeah.
Okay, but I think the painted number might be slightly different. That's the only point. But I was going to say the additional 18 cars are included, absolutely. So the good news is we now have the full fleet. We absolutely held Bombardier's feet to the fire about having them by the year end. I was very pleased to receive an email confirming that it is on the test track. We'll get you the actual painted number, because I know you're interested in that. But that includes the additional 18. The reliability figures are markedly improved, actually. I'm just getting you that number. It was the mean distance between failure, where the mean distance between failure for the month over month, the rolling annual average or monthly average was 168,000. Last month was up to 278,000. So these things are bedding in, they're getting better, and the good news is we'll have the whole fleet on property in service imminently. They're all actually physically in New York now.
Okay, thank you. Any questions? Okay, thank you so much. Let's go to Steve Plachocki for the procurement package.
Good afternoon. The procurement package representing New York City Transit includes 4 actions totaling an estimated $604 million in expenditures. I'd like to highlight the hybrid and diesel procurements in this month's agenda that resulted in a split award recommendation to Nova Bus, a division of Prevost Car US, and New Flyer of America, Incorporated. The total purchase of 833 low-floor 40-foot buses covered under this multi-year procurement will replace existing buses that have reached the end of their useful life. Working under board-adopted authorizing resolutions, a competitive request for proposal was conducted for the purchase of 275 hybrid buses with options for up to 558 additional buses. An extensive outreach to the bus manufacturing community was performed, and 2 bus manufacturers, Nova Bus and New Flyer, submitted proposals. After concluding negotiations, both manufacturers submitted best and final offers that were comprehensively reviewed by the selection committee, who unanimously recommended a split award between Nova Bus and New Flyer. Nova Bus is recommended for a base award of 165 hybrid buses for approximately $132.4 million, with options for up to 126 additional hybrid buses and 209 diesel buses for an additional $227.2 million. New Flyer is recommended for a base award of 110 hybrid buses for approximately $86.6 million, with options for up to 84 additional hybrid buses and 139 additional diesel buses for an additional $155.1 million. The selection committee unanimously agreed that splitting the award yielded the best value for New York City Transit by providing earlier delivery of buses at a competitively blended price. For hybrid buses, Nova Bus's superior delivery schedule and greater New York State content outweighed New Flyer's lower price, and slightly higher technical evaluation. It should be noted that Nova Bus will begin delivery of the hybrid buses 22 weeks earlier than New Flyer. For the diesel buses, Nova Bus's lower price, superior delivery schedule, and greater New York State content outweighed New Flyer's slightly higher technical evaluation. While Nova Bus and New Flyer will begin delivery of the diesel buses at the same time, Nova Bus will complete their delivery of the diesel buses 14 weeks earlier than New Flyer. Splitting the award enables New York City Transit to retire overage buses at an accelerated pace. This will increase the reliability of the overall fleet and result in significant savings on maintenance costs associated with older buses. Additionally, a split award will foster future price and technological competition, as well as mitigate potential performance and supply risks associated with a single award to a manufacturer. The hybrid bus awards, including option quantities, will have an average New York State content of 40%, representing approximately $153.7 million of New York State content, while the diesel buses will have an average New York State content of 29%, representing approximately $62.6 million in New York State content. Nova Bus will manufacture its portion of the buses in its facility located at Plattsburgh, New York, and New Flyer will utilize its facility in Jamestown, New York, to build sub-assemblies that will later be incorporated into each of the buses that will be built in St. Cloud, Minnesota. The negotiated price for both Nova Bus and New Flyer awards, including option prices, was found to be fair and reasonable based upon favorable comparison to the estimate. I request the committee's approval of all items in the procurement agenda.
Okay, thank you, Steve. I'll ask for a motion to move the procurement package. Is there a motion? Thank you. Any questions or comments on the procurement actions? Oh, that's a first. I want to call a vote to move the procurements to the MTA board. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Procurements are moved to the full board. Jay, please summarize the final proposed budgets for 2020.
Sure. We are seeking the committee's approval for the 2020 final proposed budget and the four-year financial plan for years 2020 to 2023 for New York City Transit, Staten Island Railway, and MTA Bus. Budget and financial information was included in the materials presented last month to the board and will be presented again to the Finance Committee as well as the full board this month. All three agencies maintain funding to support planned service levels in a safe, reliable, and efficient manner. The budget includes several new programmatic initiatives as well as new budget reduction initiatives that are necessary to maintain a balanced budget. The committee agenda book includes staff summaries for all three agencies and provides more details for the programmatic and budget reduction initiatives, as well as key financial data for each agency.
Thank you. Any questions or discussion from the committee on the budget action item? Commissioner Albert.
Yes. Does this proposed budget make any assumptions on the level of fare evasion?
Yes, it includes $50 million annual revenue recovery from fare evasion for a total of $200 million.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Commissioner? No, go ahead, Commissioner Lynn.
So I'm going to take a couple of minutes because I am going to vote no on both the budget and financial plans, and I want to explain that pretty carefully. I want to start by saying a lot of tremendous stuff has taken place, which has not been commented yet. I really want to congratulate Andy, and I would congratulate John Samuelson, if he were here too, of a very important labor agreement that was reached. And I think we'd be having a much different conversation now and looking at the holidays very differently without that labor agreement in place. So I really congratulate the parties involved in that. But I believe that the budget and financial plan have some severe problems that raise a lot of concerns. And I'll enumerate them. And they actually track, when Bob Ferrand presented his financial plan in November, he said significant risks to the November financial plan, had a full sheet of risks. And I think each of them are very important and need to be considered at this point. I'll start with the labor agreement. I commend the agreement. I'm in favor of the agreement. We'll vote for the agreement once ratified and presented to us. We now know from an email from Pat Foy that the cost of that agreement is about 2.3% net cost per year, which is 0.3 of a point more per year than we have in the financial plan and in the budget. I understand that year one with the 2% wage increase is probably funded within the budget because it's a backloaded set of wage increases. Serious labor planning, serious budget planning would now accommodate those costs. We now know, we're on notice from the email from Pat Foy and the comments in the paper, we know that the settlement costs more than we've now put forward in our budget and financial plan. Probably not in the budget, but clearly in the financial plan. Responsible budgeting would require us looking at the financial plan, responsible act as a board to look at the financial plan and accommodate that. I must admit, in the 17 years that I worked for the city with Koch and de Blasio, we always would accommodate in the budget and financial plan the cost of an agreement, and when it was a pattern agreement, we would accommodate the cost, applying that to everybody in the workforce, because the assumptions would be that we're not going to settle for less than that, and that's not being done. But if that were a loan, that would be only an element. There are a whole host of other items that are in this financial plan that I think are very worrisome. Reducing the fair revenue loss that's been talked about a lot, $200 million of reduction in fair revenue loss. I don't think we have seen what is the program that is going to accommodate that. The 500 new cops, which I think there are lots of reasons. There are lots of important points: fare evasion, homelessness, quality of life, crime prevention, terrorism prevention, all important. But I haven't seen the plan as to how these officers will fight these items. Those are a lot of different items to be fought by 500 workers. Those 500 workers assume no supervisors. That is irresponsible to say to the public there are going to be 500 new people and assume no supervisors in that group. If the supervisors come out of the 500, it means fewer than 500. There is no very or minimal overtime assumption. The one thing we know from the Alex Partner report is that the average overtime of an MTA police officer is about $38,000 a year, the highest of any of the MTA workers, higher than Long Island Railroad workers. I'm not saying it's irresponsible. I'm saying that it needs to be accommodated in our financial planning, and is not in there. The cost of controllable overtime is assumed to go down by $50 million a year. We just heard that there's a $50 million excess for this current year in overtime. I haven't seen the plan for how that's going to happen. There is a $360 million in this financial plan for renegotiating paratransit with the city. There are lots of issues in terms of what the program should look like, whether they're cost savings or not. But the one thing I know for sure is the New York City has not yet said that they are on board. I think they've given indications to the opposite on that. And we're assuming $361 million in this financial plan without the basis of support for that. On the Alex Partner changes and the budget reduction plans, we keep hearing how things need to be modified and changed. I think that, and that was Bob Ferrand's number one risk, was achieving revised Alex transformation savings assumed in the budget. Number two was assuming the budget reduction plan savings. I don't think we have seen how we're going to accommodate them. So I am perhaps a little old-fashioned, especially reflecting on the death of Felix Rohatyn over the weekend. He was at a time, and I joined the city at a time, when Ed Koch was mayor, Hugh Carey was governor, Don Kummerfeld was the chairman of the New York City Financial Control Board, Brigham was budget director, and Felix Rohatyn was the head of MAC. I do not believe that the plan that we are being asked to adopt would be consistent with the principles set forth during the fiscal crisis. Let's never forget the Daily News headline, Ford to New York, dropped dead. We have a very, very problematic budget going forward. I don't think we're having the serious conversation and making the serious decisions necessary. So based on the lessons I learned during the city fiscal crisis, and I guess in honor of the teachings of Felix Rohatyn, I'm going to vote no.
Anyone else? Commissioner Jones.
Yeah, I am also going to vote no. I think Bob has outlined many of the concerns I have, but I still remain particularly concerned about the 500 police officers. When I first joined this board in 2016 and raised questions about the allocation of resources of the existing police force, I was told that 2/3 of the work was stopping fare evasion in the subways, essentially hiding behind poles to catch basically many young people jumping over turnstiles. As we've been told now, the bulk of the problem ultimately, and the estimates now of where we're hemorrhaging money in fare evasion, is basically on the bus service. Though I see in the last page of our document that there's been a readjustment of the expected fare evasion rates that shows a sharp increase in the numbers on subways and a drop in buses, but the methodology, how they came to this new estimate, is not explained, other than to say that's the reason there was both an increase and a decrease. So I'm worried about the methodology and understanding it. Basically, I run an agency that does, essentially has researchers. So I'm going to have to get a better understanding of how this significant decrease in the amount of fare evasion and the revenue assumptions are going to go, how we're going to train and prepare this new cadre of police who traditionally haven't been geared towards dealing with bus fare evasion, where the hemorrhaging is, and I am particularly concerned about that. And as I've expressed again and again, I've also been very concerned about our rising rates of expenditures, expense budget now creeping towards 20% in debt service. And when I was, for my short, strange career, I chaired a small bank. We were forced by the regulators to stress test our assumptions, not only based upon us being able to get enough money in reserve in case there was a demand on our resources. In this case, I don't know what happens if there's a sharp disruption in the markets that lead to us having to pay much more in debt service on the existing debt. The assumptions, at least as I understand it, are based on everything going well. I'm very concerned that that 19% debt service number in a real economic downturn might not be acceptable going forward. For all those reasons, again, I join Bob. This is not a reflection on my deep appreciation of what the staff has done. I have to vote no on this as well.
Over the many months that we've discussed the addition and the proposal and addition of additional law enforcement in our subway system or across our transit system, including commuter railroads and buses, I've made the comment that we don't have, at least the board has not been apprised of a strategy for deployment of these resources. And many of us have referenced on a number of occasions how social media has depicted this new law enforcement personnel in our system. And over the weekend, there was a video on social media of SantaCon, during SantaCon. And this particular video showed a number of individuals hopping the turnstile at Astor Lafayette. And this was a very different demographic that has been portrayed before and repeatedly on social media. This demographic, in fact, according to this very brief video that has been circulated and viewed many times, was not stopped at this particular station. And I bring this up to note that we as an agency had been informed of SantaCon. In fact, the railroads in particular had sent out press releases and notices advising the public that alcohol would be banned on the system. And I note that because there were many preparatory measures taken by agencies, and I'm sure by our police force, both at MTA and New York City. in preparation. But this is the context with which the public is faced when we're talking about the addition of law enforcement. And this is why I think it's critically important to impress why a deployment strategy is necessary and needed for us to understand why in this particular instance there wasn't additional personnel stationed at Astor Lafayette, other stations throughout our system for this very notorious disruptive social event that happens to everybody's displeasure every single year unless you're a participant in SantaCon. So I think rightfully there's a lot of concern in the public. They see these two competing realizations in our system, and there's a very real perceived inequity in how, again, seemingly this enforcement is being rolled out in our system. And this, I'm not saying anything unique, I'm not saying anything new that others haven't said and that our chief has not acknowledged, but I'm bringing this up because this is so recent, and this just happened a few days ago. And I want to further impress why this deployment strategy and having knowledge of that is important. We have a task force, right, for fare evasion, and there's money in the operating budget for 2020 to continue and support this task force. Seems to me that this task force, one of its priorities should be sharing with the board and the public what the deployment of resources would be. Thank you.
Thank you. I happened to see that video this morning. So a couple things happening there. First, if Chief Coogan or if Pat Warren want to comment on what kind of presence there was in the system over the weekend, I would welcome that. But second of all, I do believe that that was a coordinated turnstile jumping protest. Is that correct? Okay. And so I just want to make sure I understand your point.
The SantaCon was the SantaCon event was a bunch of individuals dressed in Santa costumes hopping the turnstile. But seemingly, right, and I say seemingly because we don't know for sure, but seemingly these are individuals who are not people of color. And I say seemingly because most people don't realize that I'm a person of color, right? So, but the demographic is very different from what we've seen, and that's what I was alluding to and mentioning when I was bringing this up, that we have two very different demographics here that are being addressed differently.
Well, I want to make sure I understand, because for this protest I think you're talking, or for this incident you're talking about specifically, there were flyers about evading the fare.
No, this was in participants in this weekend's SantaCon event
No, I know.
who were just hopping. It didn't appear to be a coordinated, deliberate fare evasion effort.
So maybe we're talking about two different videos. But, and look, I think everyone in this room had better things to do than to get extremely drunk on Saturday or Sunday or whatever it was. Not that that's, I mean, like, people should have fun with the holidays, but I always experience SantaCon as like, oh God, please stop throwing up on my sidewalk. But for the protests that you're talking about, maybe we've seen two different videos, but one of the things that's been circulated today was the flyers that were at the station saying jump the turnstiles and evade. But I take your point. I'd love to hear from Chief Coogan and from Pat Warren. I think we had a significant presence in the system over the weekend in preparation for SantaCon and all of the other events. If the suggestion is that there were police at that station and they decided not to take action, I want to understand that. Is that the allegation? Okay.
You saw specifically state that it would be at Astor Place Station?
Is the suggestion that the police were there and decided not to take action?
Oh no, that wasn't my suggestion. My suggestion actually wasn't a suggestion. It was just an observation on social media, seeing these two different populations and how that's been addressed differently. So I don't know, and I would welcome the chief to explain. I don't know if they were
I think it's important
police
to
officers
talk
there.
about, because we can't just leave that out there like that. Pat, did you want to jump in?
I'll just talk about the railroads real quick, and I know this is the transit, but for the railroads, for the MTA PD, they did up their law enforcement on all the railroads, both on the trains and the platforms for this particular event. So there were more folks out there. Chief Coogan can talk about transit.
Okay, I mean, there's a yearly event, happens every year. We did have extra personnel out for that, Fourth Santa Con. Asked the place, I don't know if we had anybody at that particular station, and you did say that there was no police in the video, right, that you saw? Yeah. So I hope they would do something if they saw a bunch of people jumping over the turnstile. I don't have any numbers on any enforcement that was done. It's a possibility there was, but I don't have any. But again, we did have extra personnel out there for this event, which happens every year. And any event that we learn of, or that we know that's happening, we do put extra people at certain stations. We can't put them at every station, but we do put them at certain stations.
Okay, thanks, Chief. Commissioner Jones.
Yeah, I don't want to beat a dead horse, but again, in 2016, when I first joined, it was clear that the police department in NYPD were targeting basically black and brown communities that were poor. They didn't seem to make the exception and equity argument seriously, that the entire system has to be policed equally, that when people violated in good fun at SantaCon should be treated the same way as people at Fulton and Nostrand or wherever it is. And I think that builds, we have to recognize there's a history here that is skewing the public's attitude as to the fairness and equity in the system. And we have to, it's a reality, I'm sorry, it goes back to my childhood, growing up in Bedford-Stuyvesant. So there is a history here that has to be dealt with. And every time you have something where people are given a pass because they're in a more advantaged neighborhood, yet they come down hard on young black and brown kids jumping turnstiles at Fulton and Nostrand, it perpetuates that. Despite what we're trying to do now, we are trying, I've talked, we are trying to shift the attitude, but there's still a lot of trust building that has to go on before people don't react to every time they seem to see disparate treatment.
So, look,
And Commissioner Jones, sorry.
I completely agree. I completely agree that everyone should be treated the same. It is absolutely inappropriate and unfair if one group of folks all jumping the turnstile is treated differently than other folks jumping the turnstile. That's why I'm trying to ask the question, were police there and ignored it, which would be completely inappropriate, or do we have video of before police arrived, right? And I know that we know that the station agent called the police when this all happened, so I'd love to know what the reaction was. But I am agreeing with you vociferously and agree that this is a huge issue. But the problem is this is where we always end up with in this committee, which is that there's an inherent distrust of NYPD for many years and for, by the way, plenty of good reasons that we've seen in the past. And the issue is it's impossible to resolve in this committee, and we can't end up in a place where, because the NYPD has a troubling history on this stuff, we then can't police the system, because we can't end up in that place either. Commissioner Vanderpool.
I think, and what I'm going to say is not in discord to any other comment, but I think the issue really is, and the chief, you've just touched on this, is why were there not police officers stationed at Astor Lafayette? Just considering that this is a community that is it's a college community, there's certainly a lot of students who are very excited, and others, about SantaCon, for example. Why wasn't there a proactive measure? And this could be a rhetorical question, Chief, or if you'd like to answer it, I'm not putting you on the spot, but I do want to make the point that, or ask the question, why were there not police officers stationed there? And it just reinforces the perception that we are just putting our law enforcement in communities of color and not in other communities. And that was really the point that I wanted to impress.
Well, with this, ask the place, I don't know, maybe we didn't believe that it would be as busy as it was, but we do put, the majority of SantaCon detail or officers that were put out there were put out in Manhattan, Midtown Manhattan. That is where we put them. I hope they would take enforcement action if they saw something, but again, those officers for that detail, I'm sure, if not all of them, most of them, were put out in Midtown Manhattan. There's many stations that we can't police every station. And Commissioner Jones, I totally agree with you. I could care less if all of those people in them Santa outfits were grabbed, summoned, and arrested if they had to be, you know? But, you know.
Just so that everyone has full context, Sarah or someone else, can you please just circulate to the board the flyers that were passed around urging everyone to urging the folks to jump the trust, just so that folks are all operating off the same information. Commissioner Lacewell.
Will do.
Yes, perhaps after this meeting, we could just get a report on what exactly happened. I think it's not helpful, in particular, for our staff to speculate, and that just leads to further unproductive dialogue. What we need are the facts.
Okay. Anything else? Okay. All right. I have now lost place where we are. Okay. If there are no further questions, I actually think we need to go to Judy McLean for service changes.
We still need to take a vote on the financial plan.
Chair, just on the budget, you don't actually need to take a vote here today.
It just goes to the board on
Yes,
Wednesday.
it does. Yes, it does.
Okay. Yep. Thank you. Okay. Judy, can we go to service changes?
Yes. Good afternoon, everyone. As per our guidelines for major service changes, we requested that the chairman authorize a public hearing regarding the proposal to redesign the Bronx bus network. This redesign will simplify routes, making them more direct and eliminating time-consuming turns. It will improve bus stop spacing, balancing the need for faster service and more reliable service with bus stop access. It will improve frequency on key routes, building a network of sustainable all-day frequent bus service. It will enhance route connectivity and expand bus priority. With our partners at New York City Department of Transportation, we conducted an analysis of major Bronx corridors and identified 10 corridors for bus priority improvements that would most benefit Bronx bus customers. These include 181st Street, Washington Bridge Corridor, and the Fordham Road Corridor. Both of these have 1 bus per minute and operate at 2 to 4 miles per hour in the evening peak period. Other top priority corridors include Tremont Avenue, Story Avenue, and East 149th Street. Public input is still being solicited on the proposed final plan, and any adjustments to the plan will be shared with the public prior to the public hearing. This is to allow the public to comment on the proposed final plan and any adjustments at the public hearing. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Commissioner Albert.
Yes. Judy, you were here during the public session, I guess. Did you hear the person speak about the BXM1 and the severe afternoon cut in service? Is that what's happening?
So a lot of yes, I did hear earlier, and there were some span adjustments on some of the express bus routes, and we are getting some comments on that, and that's one of the reasons why we are still taking public input. We still have several meetings coming up this week and through the end of December. And then in January, we plan to propose some adjustments so that folks will have that information in advance of the public hearing and, they can comment on that. We'll be coming back to the board most likely in April with the final plan and for the board's approval at that point.
May I add something to that?
Please, yes.
So I just wanted to add, as part of our network redesigns, as we know, we've been talking about it. We start out with a data-driven approach. Origins, destinations, clean sheet, and on some of those spans, specifically on the off-peak, we're finding single-digit riderships. So that was some of the rationale behind it. But again, we put forward our proposed final plan. We're listening to feedback, and like Judith said, we'll come back with some alternatives.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, President Byford, I'll turn to you for standard follow-up reports.
Thank you, Chair. In addition to MetroCard report, the book also includes 3 quarterly reports, those being EEO and diversity, which, just a reminder, folks, will be discussed at the Diversity Committee meeting on Wednesday morning, as well as the transit recidivism and fare evasion reports for Q3 of 2019.
Yeah, I raised this earlier. I'd like to know the change in methodology that led to the significant changes in the rates that are presented here. Doesn't have to be now, but I just want to know, is this a moving target? Are we going to get a new revision next month saying, well, we've come up with a new system? I'd like some understanding of that.
No, it's a good question. I had the same question myself yesterday, and then going into this morning. Pat Warren is your person on that, and I asked him the same question this morning, and he'll brief. And I'm sure he's happy to do it one-on-one, or he can brief the whole group. My sense is that it just okay.
Since it does have a material impact on the budget, I think the entire board should be briefed on how that goes.
Chair, if it helps, we'll provide a one-pager to summarize the change in methodology, or I'd say rather the improvement in methodology.
Thank you very much, sir.
And if it's helpful, I will summarize what I have learned, which is that the change consisted of more counters with improved oversight of the folks who were actually doing the counting. So we upped the number, and then we provided a little oversight as well. Okay. President Byford, any outstanding action items?
No, Madam Chair, we are up to date with outstanding items. Thank you.
Any final questions regarding New York City Transit and Bus Committee agenda as a whole? Okay, if not, I ask a motion to adjourn. Second? All in favor? Okay, thank you. We are adjourned.